tear, it falls and hits the ground. A tree, it falls without a sound. A bird, it calls and sends you home. A man, he sits in the cold all alone.
Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for joining me at the Joy of Sunflowers. Please introduce yourself a little bit more.
So my name is Miri. I am a mom of four with one on the way. My two oldest are my lost babies, and then I have two living kids who are 5 and 2. And I do a lot of work with other lost moms, just talking about my experience and what I've learned, because my first loss was almost 10 years ago now. And I also run a little shop called Brushes and Fiber where I make stickers and prints, and I have a few t-shirts too for lost moms and moms who have babies in the NICU, or hopefully, as I expand it, are medical moms who have babies with long-term chronic illness.
Oh, that's really lovely that you're doing that. I know, this event is only for infertility and pregnancy loss, but yeah, I've been seeing a lot more stories about sort of infant issues and sort of infant loss and things like that, like that I didn't even know about, like especially like the NICU stuff. So thank you. That's amazing. Like I couldn't even imagine what that would be like as an experience. So it's really lovely that you're doing that. Let's start at the very beginning. Did you always know that you wanted to be a mum, or was it something that you moved towards?
I did. I always loved babies. I actually have 11 siblings, and I am number 6. So there were always lots of babies around. And I would play with baby dolls a lot. There's actually a picture of me. I'm probably like 2 or 3, I want to say, and I've got like 2 baby dolls and just running around with 2 baby dolls. And so, when we got where me and my husband were talking during our dating, it was something we definitely talked about wanting, and just never expected to have as much trouble as we did with having kids.
Yeah, that's like a normal thought, especially after having like 11 siblings. You're like, wow, my mom is super fertile. I'm gonna be fine. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, my mom kept telling me how she got pregnant like as soon as my dad sneezed at her or something, and I was like, great, I'm not gonna have any problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So when did you and your husband sort of realize that it wasn't going to be like an easy road?
So we got married in June of 2013 and found out we were pregnant a couple months later. But I should have known something was up from the get-go, because like I felt off, and I didn't feel like I would feel nauseous every once in a while, but mostly felt like I had like a really long running flu. Um, and I took pregnancy tests because my period was missing, but they always came back negative. And so finally I just went to a doctor and I was like, I've been feeling off. And they were like, well, is there a chance you're pregnant? I'm like, well, yeah, but I've taken like a million home pregnancy tests for months and they've all come back negative. And so they ran theirs and they were like, oh, you're pregnant. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And at that point, I think I was about 7 weeks pregnant. And so I should have, but I had no idea, because miscarriage was like, my mom had had one, but I was just like, it was just kind of like a far off thing. Like, oh, I had a miscarriage between your younger sisters. And like, I never really thought about it. And then, so I went home, told my husband. We were both in like complete shock because we wanted to wait like at least a year before we had kids. And um, 2 weeks later, like I also really never really had any symptoms. I was never really nauseous or any of that. And 2 weeks later, I started bleeding, went to the ER by myself because my husband couldn't get out of work. And they couldn't even see anything on the ultrasound. I should have been 9 weeks pregnant. And so, they told me I had had a miscarriage at that point. and just kind of sent me on my way. Didn't really tell me anything to do next. And after that miscarriage, we wanted to start trying again, and ended up with 2.5 years of infertility. And like had all the tests done, and they just told us, oh, it's unexplained infertility. We can't really find anything wrong with either of you. And so it was just like 2.5 years of, I was also going to school at the time to be a nurse, of just like trying to balance, okay, I want to go to school, be a nurse, but also I really, really just want to be a mom. And it's, impossible, like month after month. It was just disappointment after disappointment. And just really having no reason why, and trying everything under the sun that I could find to try, and just nothing really working.
Yeah. It's amazing how like you sort of sometimes you come into it and you're like, oh, we could have waited in a year, and then you're pregnant, but then a loss happens, and then you're like, no, I want this, like I want to have a baby, and our minds, it's like a switch, like we just switch over to like mum. I'm a mum, and I say that to a lot of women, like, you're a mum as soon as you are pregnant, and it doesn't matter whether that baby gets to be here on earth or wherever you believe it is now, because you were still like carrying that child. I was going to say as well, like my first 3 pregnancies, I did actually have side children, and I didn't show up on pregnancy tests for like the first 10 weeks, I want to say, especially with my first, I didn't show up at all. And I was like, what? Like, but I haven't had my period. So I went and got blood test done, and the doctor was like, oh, there's no, like, if you're not showing up on the pregnancy test, then you're probably not pregnant. And I was like, yeah, well, I need to check, because I feel like I'm going crazy. And it was positive, and I had him, and so that's not too uncommon. Like, I know they say it is, because like obviously in Hollywood they always show the woman peeing on a stick and it being positive, but I mean, you can't pee on a stick wrong, so
there's really no way to mess that up.
No. And I took multiple tests, like, so even if I messed one up, I don't think you can, but I would have found out at some point. So I didn't start showing until after 10 weeks. So it's definitely not you. And that wasn't necessarily an indication of anything, because it's weird. It can be weird. Yeah. The body's weird. But so how did that first loss go? Because obviously they sent you home. So did you sort of release everything naturally at home then?
And
how was that?
Like, I even like still went to my first prenatal appointment, and they like just turned me away at the front desk. I was like, you don't want to like make sure? And they were like, no, like, you had a miscarriage, just go back home. Like, it was like a terrifying experience, and like I had no idea like what to do. And like for me, I was only 19 when we got married, so I was 19 when we had my first loss. And thinking about it, like, I was 19, like I was still so young, and I had also not realized it before, but I also had some pretty bad depression and anxiety. It just never really, like, I just never really noticed that I had it until I had that loss. And I remember, like, I mean, we were still pretty new into our marriage, and we didn't have our apartment completely furnished yet or anything. And I remember I would just sit on the floor, like, I just sat on the floor for like weeks on end, just watching TV shows. I just like unable to move because I didn't know what to do. And like, we had told a few people we were pregnant, but not really anybody, because we had bought into don't tell anybody until you're 12 weeks. And so nobody really knew like what was going on with us. And I was also living in a new city, because I had moved from my small town to one of the biggest cities in the US to be with my husband, because that's where he worked. And so I didn't really have any friends, and it was just like a period and then, you know, going through infertility. And we also didn't tell anybody about that because we didn't think we were supposed to. So nobody really had any idea of what we were going through. And like one of the main drivers behind why I started talking about this after my second son passed away was a couple months in, and after my miscarriage, one of my friends who had been one of my closest friends from back home, I guess she just got fed up of hearing about my grief, and she told me, okay, it's just time to move on now. Like, we don't need to talk about this anymore. Like, and like after that, like our friendship just slowly drifted apart, and we haven't really talked much over the years since. And just I remember like feeling like, okay, you just need to be quiet about this. Like, you can't talk to anybody about it. And so I didn't. And like that loneliness, that depression, that everything that I would like kind of got put in with that comment just drove everything after my second son passed away of, I'm not going to be quiet about this anymore because I can't do that again. So it was a very, very hard time for me. I did eventually start seeing a therapist and worked through it at that point. But yeah, I had no direction, no idea what to do with miscarriage or infertility because nobody told me what to do. And I was still so young and like just had no idea.
Yeah, they really give you like nothing. Like, you know, I mean, I was expecting like a pamphlet. Like, I know it's not very tasteful, but I was expecting something, but they were just like, oh, just go home. Okay. Anything else that you want to tell me? Like, I had a GP just talk into the loss, like, oh, you must feel so awful. And like, and I was like, okay, but you're like a doctor, like, you're gonna tell me anything to expect? Or and did you have the same sort of experience with your second loss as your first? Like, no explanation, just like, hey, go home.
So not really. So his is a little more complicated. So 2.5 years in, we had seen a fertility specialist. I was in the like actual nursing school, part of nursing school. And at that point, like if you're pregnant and you have a baby and like say you have your baby on Saturday, you have to be back in class on Monday. Like you're not allowed to miss classes.
Wow.
Or you fail. It's incredibly intense. And so we were like, yeah, because the fertility specialist was like, we can't find anything wrong with you. We'll just start with Clomid and it'll be $500 a round because your insurance won't cover it. And we were like, okay, we'll like save up. I'm in the middle of school. I was supposed to be done that December. And we'll start like maybe in like October or something. So that way, if I do get pregnant, like I'm not having the baby and like having to go back to school the next day. So it was in 2016 and I just started my second semester and I started to feel really sick and I missed my period, but I thought it was because I was so stressed out. Because like they were putting us through medical surgical nursing in 6 weeks. They were because like requirements had changed in the state of Texas and like you had to do it faster in less hours. And so it was like ridiculous. Almost our entire class was failing. I was at the point where I was one of the few that was like just above a failing grade. And
Wow.
like I was one test away from failing the class. Like, so I just thought that and I was like, I guess there's like an off chance I could be pregnant. So I took a test and I think it was like, is this the one that was 4 a.m? No, that was my other son. So I took a test, you know, just getting ready for school and I come over and it's positive and I'm like, holy cow. Like it's been 2.5 years of one line mocking you. And now there's two. And I had to kind of just like bottle it all up and run into school. And I remember like on our break that day, like going out and I was talking to my lab partner, who was my closest friend in nursing school, and just being like, I'm so freaked out. Like, because she was somebody that was going through infertility as well. And so we had talked about it a lot. And like made the first appointment, and a few weeks later started bleeding again. And I went to the ER by myself again. I remember just crying my eyes out the whole way there, like, just please don't let this be another miscarriage. And fortunately, that my husband again couldn't get out of work because he takes the bus into work, and they weren't running during the day. But we had a friend who was in medical school downtown with where he works, and he told his professors, "Oh, I have a family emergency." Went and picked up my husband and brought him to the ER, and then stayed with us the whole time. So he was incredible. And so we went in, and I remember the ultrasound tech, she's like, "Okay, the first thing I'm going to show you is a little flicker on the screen. That's your baby's heartbeat." And he was there, and he was okay. But he had 2 giant bleeds on either side of him. And so they told me, "You're probably going to miscarry." And I remember the nurse, as like I was getting discharged, talking to me like I had already lost the baby. She's like, "You're so young, you can try again." Like, I'm like, the baby has a heartbeat. The baby's still alive. Like, why are you talking to me like this? Like, it said like threatened miscarriage on my paperwork. So maybe she just thought, oh, she's like already had one, and they're just, I don't know. But so we go home, and at that point I had to drop out of school because they put me on bed rest, and they're like, "Yeah, if you go on bed rest, you can't be here anymore. Like, you can't do clinicals. Like, you just have to drop out." And honestly, I was kind of relieved because I was hating it. And so for like 2 weeks, I'm just on bed rest. It was the best thing ever after being in nursing school, like just laying on my couch for 2 weeks watching Netflix. But at the same time, just like so much anxiety. And they had me follow up with my OB, and the baby was fine, still had 2 big bleeds, but he was growing. And we thought once we got past that point, everything would be fine. So there was still like a bit of naivete in pregnancy, not realizing even after you hit the 12-week safe mark, things can still go wrong. And so the bleeds cleared up, and he was fine, he was growing. And then you have this long stretch where you don't get an ultrasound until from like 12 weeks to 20 or so, depending on your OB. And I remember when I was 16 weeks pregnant, I had exercised that day, and like I just felt like something was really wrong with the baby. And so much so that I drug my husband to the ER at like midnight. And I was like, we're getting the baby checked, but they wouldn't do an ultrasound. They were telling me I was being paranoid. I just exercised too much, so I wasn't feeling right. And they'd done like a Doppler, and they're like, your baby's fine. And so, I believed them, even though I still felt like something was really wrong. And then at 19 weeks, we went and got our anatomy scan done, and we had on one of our like screenings, blood works, he had high alpha fetal proteins, and they told us that can indicate spina bifida. So we need to see a genetic counselor first. So we go see the genetic counselor, and she was like, "Oh, you had those bleeds. Sometimes those make really high false positives." So again, we're going into the ultrasound thing. Oh, nothing's really wrong. And then I remember we're sitting in there, and the ultrasound tech's just really quiet. And he was pushing a lot into my right hip. Like, he's like, "I'm sorry, like, I can't get good pictures of the baby." And I thought, oh, the baby's just being stubborn. Because, they're not allowed to tell you anything. And at this point, like, I didn't really know what an ultrasound was supposed to look like. But like looking back at it, because we actually have a recording of that ultrasound, like, it looks bad. And he's like, "Okay, I'm going to go get the doctor." And so she comes in, and it was actually a friend of ours. And she's like, "I'm so sorry. I don't think your baby has any kidneys." And we were like, how is that even possible? Like, this, like, babies don't grow their kidneys. Like, what is going on? And so she double checked, and she's like, "Maybe I see something that looks like a kidney, but I'm not sure." She's like, "The other thing is like, you could have placental insufficiency. And so, or like your water could have broken. And you just didn't notice." And so she sent me home for another 2 weeks of bed rest. And she told me to drink as much water as possible. And we came back, we checked again 2 weeks later, and it didn't look any better. And whatever she had seen that she thought was a kidney was gone. And so at that point, she's like, okay, there's nothing you can do, because without his kidneys, he's not going to produce amniotic fluid. And without amniotic fluid, his lungs aren't going to develop. And so he won't be able to breathe when he's born. And it's most likely he'll be stillborn. And so they just, sent us home. They said, we'll keep monitoring him, but our only option really at this point is comfort care for you and the baby. And so we started telling family and friends. And one of my friends from back home, who I had done some of my pre-nursing classes with, she texted me back and she goes, well, have you ever heard of amnio infusions? I'm like, I've never heard of this. Until she sent me an article about the first baby to ever survive without kidneys. And it's a little girl named Abigail. And I think she's about 10 years old now. And her mom, I'm not surprised that she managed to get people to do this for her, because she is a firecracker. And so we started looking around. We started calling. We called the hospital that did her amnio infusions. We called Stanford, which had done their dialysis. And there were there was Cincinnati Children's and Colorado Children's. We called the hospital here. They were like, we won't do it. But Cincinnati Children's and Colorado Children's both had research studies going on. Colorado Children's was full, but Cincinnati Children's said, we can evaluate you and see if you'll qualify. And come to learn at the time, I'm pretty sure we were like the only people in their study at that point. So we pack up everything, leave for Cincinnati the day before our like 3rd or 4th wedding anniversary, and started tests the next day and did a whole bunch of tests. And they're like, well, he's got tiny lungs, which we expected. And maybe we saw a kidney, but we're not sure, but it's too small, even if it is a kidney. But there's nothing else wrong with him. And so you qualify for a study. And so I had a surgery done to place a port so they could put amnio infusion is where they artificially insert fluid into your womb to help the baby grow, to help them mature their lungs. And I did that 3 times a week for 9 weeks. And to make a very long story short, my water broke at 32 weeks. He was born at 33. They had to resuscitate him. He was purple. As soon as they cut the cord, he tried to breathe, but he couldn't. And over a very long 6 months, he just got better and better. And he was the first boy to survive without kidneys. At that point, there had been another little girl, but there had been no boys. And when he was about 4 months old, we transferred him home here. And I'm not going to say the name of the hospital just for legal reasons, but we transferred him here and they were like, oh, this hospital is just as good as ours. And one of our really good nephrologists, he's their head of nephrology there, and you guys should be in great hands. And we just wanted to go home at that point, because we had been in Cincinnati for 6 months. And so we transfer him home, and immediately his level of care drastically declined. They made mistake after mistake after mistake. And just before or just after he turned 6 months old, because of those mistakes, which led to him being too dehydrated, he had a stroke in my arms, and passed away about 31 hours later or so, when we chose to take him off life support. So it's definitely a very different story for Judah than it was. We named our first baby Jack. And I often find that my story is very different from a lot of other people's. Yeah, it's just, yeah. But coming back to that 16 weeks when I felt something was wrong, I later found out that 16 weeks is when the kidneys take over the production of amniotic fluid. So that is when it first could have been caught. And because they refused to do an ultrasound, it wasn't caught. And that was when I learned never to distrust my mom gut again, and always go with that, and to fight like crazy, like Judah taught me, for everything for my kids.
Yeah. Gosh, yeah, that is such a different story. And I mean, I've heard heard a similar story in terms of the baby not having kidneys, but then there were a whole load of other things that the baby had missing. So she just wasn't gonna be able to carry on. But that is amazing. Like, he was such a fighter, like that length of time, and like being born, and wow. I'm so sorry you went through that. That's a lot to have gone through, like physically and mentally. How did you move through that? Like, how did you get through that time?
I'm not sure how I did, honestly. Okay. I was having daily panic attacks. I was really not in a good place, but I would come into the hospital every day and I'd see him, and it was like a switch flipped, and I was just there to take care of him. And when I was away from him, I was terrified that something was going to happen and I wasn't going to be able to get to him in time. And we had a couple instances where that happened, and they were like, we need you to come back right now. And like when we first moved back, we lived 45 minutes away from the hospital, and like just being terrified we weren't going to get there in time. But I mean, I wish I had handled it better. I have heard stories of moms of NICU kids, even whether they live or not, handling it so much better. But I've also learned to give myself a lot of grace for that period of time, because I was only 22 and I was still working through a lot of really hard stuff. And it's okay that I handled it that way. It wasn't the best way to handle it, but honestly, like, it doesn't surprise me now that I know everything that I know, that I handled it that way. And because I was just still so young. Most people are like, oh, 22, that's not that bad. But like, being a 29-year-old now, I'm like, yeah, that was like, I was still a baby. I was still so emotionally immature. That honestly, I'm surprised I made it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm 29 as well. And yeah.
Like, yeah, I'm just surprised I made it through that. And everything that came after him passing away. Like, I don't know how I made it through those first few months. I just know I did. And just slowly things got better. And it's been a very long road. I will say that, to get to where I am now.
Yeah, I suppose like when he was in your womb and when he was born, like, it was really just, you just had to survive. You just had to keep going. You just had to go and see him. And it would have been that, you know, like you said, that switch of like, no, I'm a mom, I'm looking after him, I'm taking care of things. And then when you're at home, you're like freaking out because you're still a mom, but you're not like physically doing anything because he's not there, because he's at the hospital. So you would be freaking out. But yeah, that after part, that I think a lot of people would be like, well, how did you get through that? But I can understand that, you know, it would have just been shock. Like, shock.
There was, I remember, so like we did kangaroo care as he passed away. I sang to him. My husband read him a story. And we actually had some friends with us at the hospital. We don't have any family here in Texas. So some friends came and were with us, and one of the couples had actually lost their baby a month and a half before. And like, she handled this with so much grace, and they basically coached us through end of life care for our baby, because they basically had to do the same thing with their son. He lived 22 hours.
Oh.
And they're like, okay, this is what we did. And we're like, okay, whatever you did, we're just going to do it, because you have a bit of a roadmap and we don't. And so after he passed away, they offered to let me bathe him, dress him. And I was like, I can't look at him. And so the other mom, she's like, I'll do it. And I'm like, you just lost your baby a month and a half ago. But she bathed him. She got him dressed. She brought us back when we were ready. She took pictures. She stayed with him until the morgue came and got him, because I couldn't do it. And then she gathered up all his things. She made sure we had all his things. And then her and her husband planned his whole funeral for us, and only involved us like when we had to make like a decision that, you know, only we could make. And they had us come over for lunch and just gave us all those decisions at one time and walked us through them as much as they could. And like, it was just the easiest process of planning my baby's funeral that I could imagine. But like those first few hours was just complete and utter shock of just like the world just went quiet. And I remember like when we left so Kelly could get him dressed and everything, like all around us, there's people coming and going, doctors, nurses. They took us to like a cafe they had in the hospital because we hadn't eaten in like 48 hours. To try to get us to get something to eat. And I just remember like watching the people go by and like it just sounded quiet and like just not understanding how they were just living their normal lives. And it was the same thing when we drove home. It was a beautiful sunny day and you're seeing all the cars go by and you're like, just how is the world not stopped? And then I remember we got home, like my next emotion I actually felt was relief because that was over. And I felt really guilty about feeling relief for a long time. But someone explained to me, it's not bad because everything that you were going through, everything that Judah was going through was over. There was no more pain. There was no more suffering for either of you. And, my husband broke down that day and I've only seen him cry a handful of times. That is one of the few. And like, I was kind of there to support him in that first day afterwards. And then the next day I broke and he was somehow back together. Or he probably wasn't, but he probably just felt like he had to be my support at that point. And I don't really know what we did after that. Like, we did the funeral a week later and, there was another horrible time where we had to go to the funeral home and pick up his remains because we had him cremated. And they also had to call us to inform us right before they did the cremation. I was like, I do not want to know. It was like just the idea of it like made me sick to my stomach. But we also didn't want to do a burial because we're not from Texas. And so we didn't want to ever have to leave him behind. And so my husband handled that. And I actually remember I got pulled over by a cop when we were on our way home from the funeral home from picking up our son's urn. And I'm like, my husband was like, don't say anything, just take the ticket. Because he said that I blew a stop sign and I hadn't. And he's like, we'll just pay it. We'll just let it go. Like, just don't. Because he knew that I was just like right there, like on that verge of like blowing this cop's head off verbally. So, and then I don't think I moved from my couch for a long time. We slowly started doing more. My in-laws got us a puppy. That helped a lot. I highly recommend a lost mom get a puppy because you have all this energy that you need to take care of something and you can put it into the puppy. And so that helped a lot. And then a few months later, we found out we were expecting again, which was a huge shock because it had taken us so long to get pregnant before we just assumed it would again. And that whole pregnancy after loss was a nightmare as well. But yeah, so I'm not 100% sure how I got through all of that. Just little things that just taking little steps to slowly get yourself back on your feet. And okay, today I got dressed. Today I took a shower and like celebrating those little wins. And then when we got the puppy, it was okay. The puppy has to go out like, I don't know, it was like every 30 minutes at first to get potty trained. Like you have to get up and do these things and take him on walks or he'll destroy your apartment. And it's just those things that we were kind of made to keep doing, but we also, avoided people for a long time, even though they were super supportive of us. Because we just weren't ready to be around people. And that's okay too. Like you don't have to, and so I feel like in some areas you need to push yourself just to do daily activities, but at the same time, you don't have to go back to your regular life, whatever that looks like, until you're ready. And I think that's also something that people just don't really understand, because they just don't they're like, oh, like it was a month ago, why aren't you just like moving on? And I found people had a lot more compassion for us after we lost Judah, because he had been 6 months old, versus my miscarriage, where they were like, you're not over this yet. So it was a lot more compassion for him, and his journey had been pretty public as well. Because we had a Facebook page my sister had started, because we got text fatigue, texting everybody updates every day. And the page just kind of grew as people shared it. I think it was up to like 1,400 people at one point that were following his journey. And so it was very public. We would post every day about how he was doing. And I think that also helped me when I got to the point where I was like, okay, I know people expect me not to talk about this anymore now that he's died. I'm not going to do that, because if they supported us while he was alive, why would they not support us after? And we did find a lot of support in that, but it was a while before I really started talking about it on Instagram. That's only been about 2 years now. But it definitely helped to find the people who would let me talk about it, versus just what I did before, where I just shut off from the world and didn't have any support. Like, you need that support wherever you can find it. And if they won't give you the support, they're not your people.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to just shut off. Like, it's after you go through something, you kind of just don't know how to, you don't even know you anymore, because you change.
No.
You know, it's like you said, like, you know, go back to, you know, your everyday, but there really isn't any way of going back to
No.
anything that you were before. So I think that's probably part of why we, you know, segregate ourselves, because there's that time of trying to get to know you now, like, because you know you're different.
Yeah.
How has that changed for you? Because obviously from the first to the second, there would have been, I mean, a change from with the first, and then even more so now. So how was that second change compared to the first?
It was very different. Judah had already changed me in so many ways and taught me like so much, and he continues to teach me so much even 6 years later. And I learned to not take people at their word, and not take especially medical professionals as knowing everything, because at first I thought they did. And I now, with our 5-year-old with his special needs, like, I learned to fight for him because I fought for Judah. And it was just kind of like a weird, like, rebuilding of myself, where I had to figure out who I was again. And I don't even think I really figured that out until like a year ago, maybe. Um, and it was just a lot of stumbling around and not really knowing who I was without Judah, and being a mom, but also like, you have nothing to show for it. Because I did not feel like a mom after I lost Jack. Um, I did not think I was a mother. Like, I was expecting a baby, I had not had the baby. And like, I remember when we would go out, like if we had to go run errands or whatever, being like, I still looked pregnant, and like, but I had no baby, and just feeling like I should have my baby. People should know I'm a mom, and they have no idea. And just all of that. And then moving into, well, my baby was supposed to come home. They told us he would probably come home in about 2 months. And then suddenly, like, you have nothing to show for this like 8-month long journey you went on to try to save your baby. And just trying to reconcile all that in my head. And then moving straight from that to a pregnancy after loss was just, it was a bit of a nightmare. And like, I had to have, what they call it, Ativan, while I was pregnant with him, and I only took it a few times, and they told me as long as I didn't take it very much, it would be okay, because he wouldn't get addicted to it. But there were times when I had panic attacks so bad I couldn't come out of them on my own and had to take that Ativan. And then I moved straight into being his mom, and his issues showed up when he was a couple weeks old. And so it was never really this like chance to breathe. And because we were dealing with all that, and then the pandemic hit, and we had our daughter, and it wasn't even really like a chance to even really figure myself out, and figure my grief out until I think he was about a year and a half old, where I went on a retreat for lost moms, where I finally started like the journey of untangling everything and working through things. And even though I've been in therapy the entire time, and just that, I don't know, that point of getting to, oh, this is who I actually am, didn't even come along really until last year, which funnily enough happened because my son loves Star Wars. And realizing that I was a lot like one of the characters, and like digging into, okay, what's his personality type, and like then finding out what my personality type was, and finding out that, oh, that this is who I am, and like just things kind of all finally fell into place, and I had a lot more confidence in who I was, and just a lot more, I guess, finally coming out of that shell of, I don't know who I am, I don't know where I fit, and now realizing I'm never going to fit, because I've had this huge life-altering experience that unless you've gone through it, you don't understand. And that's okay. And people are going to be awkward around me. That's okay. And you just kind of push through it. And that they are willing to continue their friendship with you despite that awkwardness, despite not understanding. And some of them will even reach out to you and be like, okay, how can I learn more about this? How can I support you more? And we have had people like that along the way. Even one of the couples who was with us, when Judah passed away, they had a son 2 years ago, and he was born a few days before the anniversary of Judah passing away. And even just her like thinking to text me before they announced it on social media, she's like, hey, we had him, like we wanted to make sure, like we feel so privileged that he shares this day with Judah, because it was the day Judah had turned 6 months old. And even just like that small, what might have seemed like a small consideration to them, was just so big, because then you don't have to find out like on social media. Versus I've also had people that didn't give us that consideration, and you find out on social media and you're like, well, this sucks. So it's just kind of learning to kind of sit with those feelings when they come, realize they're not bad, but also not linger in them more than you need to work through everything. And I think that's an important distinction, because we can get so caught in those feelings. And I mean, some of them will take a really long time to work through. Like my most recent one was, there was a baby that was born on Judah's birthday last year, and just having to reconcile that. And even now, like watching him, oh, he's another month older on the same day that Judah was another month older, and it was hard. Like I couldn't even look at her for a while without crying. But my husband also pushed me. He's like, do you want to still be friends with her? I'm like, we're going to be around her. Because like she's in our friend circle. And he's like, you kind of have to just push through it, and kind of gave me the little push I needed to start talking to her again, to start with just giving her like a half smile in the hallway and not forcing myself to have a conversation when I wasn't ready to. And respecting those feelings, but also not sitting in them forever, because that's where you get the depression, and that's where you get the anxiety and everything that can just weigh you down. Not saying those things won't come, because they will, But that's where, if you want to take the step toward healing, and you never fully heal from this, but like healing at, let's just say, like the wound that comes with her son being born on my son's birthday, you have to keep pushing forward and doing the work instead of just sitting in it and not wanting to do the work. And I did not want to do the work, like, at all. But and having like my husband on my side being like, okay, is this a friendship you want? Is this something you want to keep in your life? And it was. And he's like, okay, so eventually you're gonna have to talk to her. You don't have to talk to her about this. And I still haven't. But he's like, you're gonna have to eventually talk to her. And so just giving myself little steps of, okay, we'll sit behind her in church. I'll give her a smile in the hallway. Like, just, and there was a lot of crying that came with those. But you still have to keep taking those steps forward if you ever want to be able to move. I call it moving forward, not moving on. Because I feel like that describes it better, because you never move on from your baby, like in the way that people think you do, where you just forget it and you move on, but you can move forward. And so it's finding whatever those little steps are for you, and they're not going to be the same for everybody. And just doing them one very painful little step at a time until you find yourself in a different place. And that's what I've noticed, is like, oh, I was in this place, but now it's like the fog has cleared and I'm here, and I'm not 100% sure how I got here, but I'm glad I'm here instead of still here. So I feel like that's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think, yeah, it can be tricky when, people don't get it. They just
That's
don't.
the hardest part, and it's the part that hurts the most, because you want them to get it, and you want to be able to talk about your baby, and you want to be able to, keep them alive in your memory and in your conversations. And like, even still to this day, with people that have been around us for such a long time, I bring up Judah and it's just quiet afterwards, because nobody really knows what to say afterwards. And I'm like, it's okay, you can keep going, like as if this were just any other of my living kids in the conversation. But because they don't have that experience, because like in our immediate friend group, other than a couple who has gone through IVF, I don't know of anyone who's even had a miscarriage. And so they just don't know. And it can be really hard to find those people who do know. And for me, those people are on Instagram, and I talk to those people, and that is where I find my community, even if I've never met them in person. And I've had to kind of come to be okay with the fact that they don't understand. They support me in it, but they don't understand, and they're going to make missteps, and they're going to say things that they shouldn't say, but that's okay, because they're trying. And yes, it will hurt me, even if they don't intend to. But they're trying. And I feel like that's such an important distinction you have to make in your brain. And you will have, I had a very long time where I was like, they just hate me. They hate me. They hate me. They don't care. But you also get to the point where you're like, okay, they're trying. They tried it. We have people who text us every year on his birthday, people who text us every year on the anniversary when he passed away. And people who send us cards. One year they all sent, like, I had texted the group and I was like, can you guys pray for me? I'm having a really hard time this year. And they all pitched in and sent me some flowers. And like, they don't understand, but they can still be there. And so I think, especially if you have people in your immediate area, which I do, who are lost moms, and understand to also look at the people that you already have around you and how they are trying. And if you feel comfortable enough, be like, hey, so this wasn't great, and this is how you can do it better the next time. which I've never been comfortable enough to do. I'm comfortable doing it on Instagram, not comfortable enough doing it in person. But yeah, so if you feel comfortable enough, but also just making that distinction of they're trying. And sometimes when you just don't have people in your life that are physically there, that has to be enough. And I hope it's not this way forever, but just coming to terms with this is where we are now, this is how it's going to be. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel very much the same. Like it, you know, the community is online for me, and I mean, we live very sort of like excluded from everyone anyway. We live on a farm, like out in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, but I've done the same thing. Like you have to talk yourself through it and be like, well, you know, this person is clearly trying to love me, not quite doing it in the way I would like, but
Yeah.
they clearly are trying.
Yeah.
For better or worse, mainly worse.
And it's like you get A for effort. Like, and I've always loved when people reach out to me and they're like, hey, I have a friend, she just had a stillbirth. How do I help her?
Yeah.
Like the most recent one I answered was they were bump buddies, so they were pregnant at the same time. Her friend's baby was stillborn, hers was not. She's like, can my friendship with her ever recover? And what do I do? And I was like, oh my gosh, this one is so hard because I don't know. Like, I still have people that like we knew in the NICU who were born really close to tiny Judah, and it still hurts to see their kids grow up because they made it home, he didn't. And I'm like, it's going to be totally up to her and what she's comfortable with. If you want to keep this friendship, keep encouraging her, keep reaching out to her, seeing how you can support her, but also be aware that she may not want to see your baby and she may not want to pursue this friendship anymore because it hurts her too much. And it could take her years, maybe years down the road, she wants to have that friendship again. But it's going to be totally up to her. And it's so individual that I feel like we can give advice on how to handle it. But at the end of it, it comes down to you just need to talk to your friend. And they may not want to talk about it. If that's fine, that's fine. If they don't, just leave it. And if they do, you need to find out exactly what they need and exactly where they are. Because I was like, she may want to hold your baby because it may be a comfort to her to hold your baby when she doesn't get to hold hers, or she may not even want to see him. Like either one of those is fine. So I really feel like it all just comes down to the individual person. Everybody grieves differently. Everybody's grief is unique. Everybody's story is unique. And you just have to, as the friend on the outside looking in, follow their lead as much as you can and as much as they're willing to share with you. But you also have to be the person to reach out and start that conversation because they're not going to want to. They're going to feel too awkward putting it on you because they don't know if you're willing or not. So I feel like that's like the important distinction there.
Yeah, but it's also fear, isn't it? Because we're scared that if we mention something or if we say something, then that person's gonna like just not talk to us or like say something really horrible or So I think
it's not wanting to lose that friendship, so you just don't bring it up.
Yeah, I think them reaching out makes a lot more sense, and that's so true. Like you just kind of shelter yourself a bit, I had a friend who'd just had a baby after I lost mine. And so I was like, do I want to see the baby? Do I not want to see the baby? And it was like a whole thing. And I did. I went and saw the baby, but it was very hard because, the baby's in front of you and you're like, this is so cute and I'm not going to have mine.
Yeah. But yeah, we had some friends who had their baby a couple weeks after Judah's funeral, and we did babysit for them a couple of times. I realize now like they went really out of their way to let us babysit him because we offered and because they lived pretty far away from us, so it was like really out of their way for them to have us babysit him. And it was great to have that baby in the house at the time, but at the same time watching him grow up. So he's the same age. Judah would be just about 6 months younger. And she had the baby first in the like line of babies in our friend group, even though I had Judah first. So she's the mom that everybody goes to for advice for their kids because she's already done it. And I'm like, they're like, oh yeah, she's the oldest mom in the group, like she has the most experience. And I'm like, technically no. And so that's a lot where a lot of hurt can come from. And just that like non-acknowledgement of the fact that I did it first. But at the same time, it makes sense because I didn't raise him like she has gotten to raise her son. So it's just, I don't know, trying to explain it to people. It's just this weird, like, he's a great kid. Like, we enjoy being around him. My kids love playing with their kids. Like, but at the same time, it's also watching their son grow up when your son didn't. And so sometimes you do need to like mute that Facebook post or, do what it is you need to do to preserve the mental health of yourself if it's hard for you to see it.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. Before we wrap it up, how has pregnancy after loss been? I'm also pregnant right now. I am.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm 28 weeks and I've freaked out a lot.
Yeah. This one has been very different from my other ones. So my other two, there was a lot of anxiety and there was a lot of just, oh my gosh, is the baby okay? Is the baby okay? Like constantly. And I think in the end, that may have saved their lives because they both stopped moving right around the end of my pregnancy as much, like their patterns changed, which led to both of them being born. But this one has been different. So I'm 16 weeks now. And it started off with like a lot of like shock because we were not expecting to have another baby. We thought we were done. But God was like, yeah, no, you're not. We were like, okay. But in the beginning, I did a lot of like, I read pregnancy after loss books. I did a lot of devotionals to kind of try to keep my peace as much as I could. Because with this pregnancy, what's been unique is this is the first time I've been pregnant on the anniversary of Judah passing away. And so I've been pregnant on his birthday before, but never on the anniversary of him passing away. And I was so, so worried about what my PTSD in particular would do. And so I talked to my doctor about it. He's like, okay, you're going to come in for an appointment the same week. We're going to do an ultrasound. We're going to show you your baby's okay. And so I did. And that helped a lot. It helped me get through the week. But then on the actual day, my brain like flipped a switch into PTSD, where now I've had major dissociation, where my brain is constantly giving me this message that I am not pregnant and constantly trying to convince me. I'm like, we have this ultrasound. I'm like, that's not your baby. I'll get the Doppler. You were just hearing things. Like, it's just been this like very weird experience of because before, and also before, like with my other two kids, I was excited to tell people, I was excited to talk about it. And this time I feel like I'm lying if I tell people. And so I had an appointment as well. My OB wasn't there, so it was a different OB. And he was actually great. Like he was like, okay, what do you need to get through this dissociation? Because I hadn't seen my regular OB, so I hadn't talked to them about it. It's like, what can we, as your maternal care team, do for you? I'm like, I have no idea. Like he's like, okay, I'm gonna go get the ultrasound and we're gonna do that real quick. Yeah. And he's like, see, look, you're very pregnant, I promise. And he I was also talking to him and I was like, okay, so I'm going to be 16 weeks in a few weeks. Like, is there any reason to do an ultrasound just to check preliminarily for kidneys? Because with amnion infusions, the sooner you start, the better. And he was like, yeah, I'll put you on my books as a follow-up. I have this rash on my hand. He's like, we'll call it a follow-up for your rash. And he's like, I'll do another ultrasound. He's like, and like, just that kind of support, I feel like is so important in an OB, especially in pregnancy after loss. And I've been fortunate enough to have very supportive OBs. So I had a different one when I was pregnant with my my living son. But she was incredibly supportive. She was like, anytime you feel anxious, come in, I'll do an ultrasound. And like we took advantage of that so many times, and it helped a lot. And with my daughter during the pandemic, they were much more restrictive. So unfortunately, that one was like, we can't just bring you in, because I think she was born in December, and so she was like right at the start was where my pregnancy started. And so that was a lot different, but I found that I have the same OB this time, and he's been a lot more like, okay, I can bring you in this time if you need to come in for a Doppler check, if you need to come in for this. So the last 2 pregnancies, there was a lot of anxiety and a lot of panic. So this one's been weird. And that like, I just have this constant narrative in my head of, you're not pregnant, you're not pregnant, you're lying, you're lying, you're lying, you're lying. And it's helped a little bit, like as I've gotten bigger. I'm still refusing to wear maternity clothes, but because I just don't like them. But like as I've started to show a little bit, and I've started to feel the baby move a little bit. But even then, like my body's like, oh, you're just having gas. Like, no, it's nothing. Like it's the weirdest thing. But having that supportive OB team on my side has also been like a huge relief, because during that ultrasound, I feel like I can just breathe for a second and the voice turns off, because it's like when I wake up to when I go to sleep. And I'm hoping it'll subside soon, but I really don't know if it will or not. I'm hoping maybe once I start feeling the baby move regularly and actually have to wear my maternity clothes and all that it will be different, and that voice will finally turn off in my head. But it's just been so interesting just how different each one of them is. And my son was panic attack after panic attack after panic attack. My daughter was, oh, we're also living in a global pandemic, so don't get sick. Like I was in the high risk group. Yeah. Because not only was I pregnant, but I have asthma. And my doctor was like, yeah, you can't leave your house, like, period, unless you're coming to see me. And like having to work through all that fear of I'm going to get COVID and die. Like, and then my baby will die, and like moving through all that, as well as moving through the anxiety I have before the baby, I can feel the baby start moving of, is the baby even still alive? Yeah. And they just missed it. Because working the downside sometimes to working with all these moms is you hear so many stories and you know what can happen. Yeah. Like there is no more wool on your eyes. You just know. There's no safe zone. Even after the baby's born, something can happen. And so it's just having to work through a lot of that, which I did not do a great job with my other 2, but I feel like I'm doing better with this time, mostly because I'm in a much better place. And I've done the work over the years. So I feel like it's gotten a little bit better each time, but this is also my 4th pregnancy after loss. And I can also say it doesn't really get easier. It's just different. Because I still have my moments of absolute panic, and I still have, oh my gosh, what if the baby's died? And I have no idea. Or like, I did a Doppler check last night because my son had come down with a fever, and I was so worried about him and his breathing that it translated to, oh my gosh, what if something's wrong with the baby? And so like did a Doppler check to be able to make myself go to sleep. And it's just finding those ways to cope through it. And then you move from pregnancy after loss into parenting after loss. And a lot of people think, oh, you had the baby, you're fine now. But then they don't realize is you kind of live in this constant fear of they're going to die too. Yeah. And even at 5 years old, I still have to go up and check on my son every night, make sure he's breathing, and my daughter, or I can't sleep. Yep. Because I just need to know that they're breathing. And I need to know that all our doors are locked and somebody's not going to come in and take my kids. Like, it's just, there's all these things that seem irrational, but until you go through it and you're parenting after loss, you're just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And like with my son, he's had like 4 or 5 diagnoses now. And so we're like very on edge with him sometimes. We're just like, okay, what's it going to be next with him? Unfortunately, I think we might be at the end of the road now that we've gotten our big diagnosis. But like at the same time, this is something that can come with other things. And so we're like, is he going to get the other things? I'm like, yeah, it's parenting after loss is its own animal. And also, like with my son having special needs, we also now have to watch his sister for them. And it's something that doesn't really show up until they're like 2. And so I'm like analyzing everything she does. I'm like, is she doing this because she's copying her brother? Is she doing this because she has it too? Like, is she just being a 2-year-old? And my therapist has been like, she's just being 2. Like, I'm like, I've never had a normal kid. Like, I don't know what this is.
Yeah, they
So-
scream. They throw things. I don't know. They do some weird stuff. 2-year-olds.
Yeah.
They're
2-year-olds.
literally insane.
Or like with my son, like I feel like we never really had a terrible 2 with him. But with my daughter, yeah, she's a stubborn little firecracker. And I hope she keeps that because it'll serve her well in life. But also I have to parent it.
Yes.
So,
I'm
but
with
yes,
you.
it's just this whole extra dynamic that it brings to parenting that again, a lot of people don't understand. And I'm probably considered more of a helicopter mom because I need to know where my kids are versus like we'll be at like a play date and everybody's kids are running everywhere. And I'm like, where are mine? I need to know where mine are. Like, I need to know they're safe. I need to know they're fine. And I'm like looking like every 2 minutes versus everybody else is like, okay. Like they're over there doing something. I don't know. But it's just like that extra level of like vigilance and anxiety that it brings into parenting after loss. And I feel like so many people don't realize it doesn't end when the pregnancy ends. It doesn't end when you see 2 pink lines and everything's fine in the pregnancy. They just think, oh, you should be happy now you're having another baby. Like I've also been told on Instagram, you should just be grateful for your living kids. And I'm like,
yeah,
well, like I've gotten to a point where I have a policy of like, if I get a nasty comment, it's a block and delete. And like, there are occasional times where I think maybe they're just misunderstanding. And so I'll explain it out. And sometimes there have been people who've been like, okay, I understand now. But then there's been other times where people are just like going off on me, especially about when I started talking about the medical mistakes that killed my son, about how I should just be respectful of medical professionals. And he had a terminal diagnosis anyway, so he was going to die anyway. And I'm like, where are you getting like, and it's a lot, but you also have to, when you choose to share these things, have this, the policy comes from my husband. He's like, block, delete, ignore. Like he is much, much more rational than I am.
They always are. What is with that? Yeah. So annoying.
They're much more rational brains. Much less emotional than
they're so logical. Like my husband, the
voice.
Like,
I don't care.
Yeah, like
he's like, I know it's not true. I don't care.
He's like, we don't even care about this person. Why are you caring?
I know.
But they said this thing, and he's like, so.
And like Judah, he's my only kid that like, if you say something about him, that I will go full on mama bear after you about this. With my other kids, I'm like, yeah, okay. But with him, I'm like, and this was even when he was alive. Like, I was so like, I hated other people holding him. Like, I was just full on like, this is my baby. Do not touch my baby. And I'm still that way with him. And so my husband has to kind of calm down my mama bear sometimes, where he's like, this doesn't matter. Okay. It's also served me well in some places. So I'm okay with it. That is still there. And it's also just like that connection of, I had this when he was alive. I still have it now. And I still want to fiercely protect Judah. Because I call Judah the kid that I love the fiercest. Because the overwhelming amount of just like fierce protection I had for him, I have never had with another one of my kids. Like I still have protective instincts toward my kids, like no doubt, but it's not as like fiercely protective as it was of Judah. And so that's just something that I have that's unique to him. So I don't mind that I still have it because it's another connection that I have with him and one of my few that I have left, all these years later. But yeah, anyway, so pregnancy after loss. this one's weird. I'm not going to say, I say it feels a little easier, but it's also not in so many ways. And I think the biggest difference is that now I have 2 little kids running around who keep me very, very busy. And so I just don't have the time that I had before to think on those things. It's like I can start getting anxiety, and then my kid's like, I want a snack. And you're like, okay, I gotta go get a snack now. And so it just kind of keeps you more distracted, I feel like, than it did in the past when there was only one, or when, we didn't have any at all. So yeah, definitely doesn't get easier. You get more distracted. You get into a better place where you can fight those thoughts, but you definitely still have them, or at least I'm definitely still having them. But I'm also just in a better place where I can go, no, this is just my fear talking. This is my anxiety talking. Like, everything was okay when I had an ultrasound 2 weeks ago. The baby was even actually measuring a week ahead. So like, everything's okay. And being able to sit in that everything's okay for a little bit longer than I would have before. Or even just like, because I had bleeding and a hematoma with this baby as well. And I went through like 3 weeks of, oh my gosh, what if the baby's not okay? And then my husband's like, everything was fine on the ultrasound yesterday. I'm like, that was yesterday. Okay, this is today. And like, the only way you can check at this point is an ultrasound. And he's like, everything's okay. Everything's okay. Everything's like, he's the constant voice of reason, sometimes to the point where it's annoying. But, but even with this one, like, I still had that constant fear until the bleed cleared up and the baby was growing and everything was checking out okay. So it's still that fear. I'm just better able to handle it now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I resonated so much with everything you just said. Like with the kids and like running around and like the fear and like worrying about them more. And it's so true. Like, I mean, I had 3 kids before loss. And I mean, I was still considered like a sort of helicopter parent, but I wasn't that, like, I was kind of like fairly reasonable in terms of like, if we're at a public park and there's loads of kids running around, I like kept an eye on them, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now I'm like, I'm with them. Like, I'm not just keeping an eye from a distance. I'm like, I'm there. I'm standing there. I'm not moving. I'm like, I'm gonna follow them around.
Yep.
Bless them. They're gonna find it hard to make friends.
I know.
And a homeschool, so it probably makes it worse. So, just like I keep them at home. Like, I don't even know how people let their kids go to school. How can you do that? Like,
yes, we're coming to that point of struggle with Arthur, because he's at the point where his needs are more than we can handle. And so like we're starting him in a special needs school, and I'm still like, it's only for 4 days a week. Like, he gets 1 day off a week, and I'm like, to go to one of his other therapies. Like, we arranged it with him, but I'm still like, for those 7 hours that he's gone, what is my brain going to do? Because I'm not going to see my son. Like,
yeah.
I'm not going to know what he's doing. And like, they'll like text us and update us and stuff, but like, I'm like, how do I know he's safe? And even like moving from this school where he's going to be one-on-one with his therapists and teachers and stuff, to, okay, where do we put him next? Like, because with like public schools, like, I'm terrified of school shootings. And even like, I've started to hear about them doing active shooter drills in the schools, where like they hire actors and have some of the kids like pretend to be the victims. And I'm like, I don't want him to see that. Like, but at the same time, like, I'm like, I also don't really want to homeschool, because I don't feel adequate to handle his needs.
Yeah.
And I know he needs like additional support. And so it's just been this like ongoing debate in my head with my husband of like, what do we do with him to keep him safe and to get him the education that we want him to have, in line with our morals and our values, and at the same time let go a little bit. So
it's hard. It's definitely
yeah.
hard. I mean, there's a lot of resources for parents with autistic kids who want to homeschool, that like a lot of resources. So if you ever wanted to look into that, there is a lot out there. It's not easy at all, obviously. It's like a whole nother, like, it's a new career for you,
Yeah.
you're taking on a new career, and that is what homeschooling is. Like you're becoming a teacher, and if you're homeschooling a kid that has like some kind of learning disability, it's even more so than before, and you kind of have to become a sort of expert. I mean, as a mom of someone with a disability, you kind of take on that already, so there is a sense of that. But there's like a whole, like, how do they learn, and then having to go through all that. But there are programs that have been created for specifically for autistic kids for homeschooling that apparently make it easier. But there's a lot out there. But there is really a toss up, especially when you can send them to a school that is for kids that have learning difficulties, and there's lots of other kids there who have the same issue, and then they can see that, and then I think it's a real pros cons toss up type thing. I totally agree with you with the public school thing. I'm not I mean, not to mention like all the politics and all the stuff crap that they put in, and like all the extra additional things, like school shootings as well. I mean, we don't really have that in Australia, but I mean,
very prevalent here in the US. Like, and I've never heard of one here where we live, but they have been like close to us in other cities, and I'm just not okay with this. And I've been hearing about them since I was a kid, and I'm just not okay with sending my kid off every single day and wondering, is he going to be safe at his school? Because it's some maniac going to walk in with a gun, like, and nothing to do with like gun control or anything. That's just, I feel like that's probably every parent's fear here at that point.
And no one's going to protect your
has their opinions on how it should be handled, but I just can't move past, is my son going to be safe at this school? Because like we've had a lot of issues with like, okay, how do we afford this? Because the state of Texas is actually really terrible for care with special needs. And we're like, how do we afford this? There's like no programs, no like government, like the government here, because it's so conservative, less government programs. I feel like in this case, like you should probably reach out to parents a little bit more, because every special needs parents I know, it's broke, like, because they're just shelling out so much all the time, and there's only so much insurance will cover, and our insurance doesn't want to cover anything. And we have to like, so people are like, oh, just put him in public school, like they have the therapy he needs, and like you'll get like specialized education plans. And I'm like, I am a lost mom, and I cannot bear the thought of sending my child to a public school and taking that chance every single day that something's going to happen. And so there's a lot of debate between me and my husband of, do we spend the money to send him to a private school, because special needs private schools are expensive, or do we homeschool, which is something I've never wanted to do, even though I was homeschooled. Because I'm
with you. I'm
not a teacher.
No,
I'm not a great teacher. I'm not great with kids, and I'm a mom. But like, and me and Arthur, his name's Arthur, are very clashing personalities, and we need breaks from each other. And I'm like, I feel like school would be the best way to do that. And my husband's like, no, he stays home, he's homeschooled, you homeschool. And I'm like, we're never going to get over this debate, are we?
Look, I didn't want to homeschool. I kind of got pushed into it. Like it just sort of, it became something that was like, well, we don't really actually have another option. Like this is what's going to work for our family. And it kind of just, it was what it was. I had wanted the career, and I'd wanted to do all those things, but it was just that's not what God had planned for me, clearly. And so I spent a lot of time like trying to work out how was I going to do it? What was I going to do? And honestly, like it's still a battle. Like it's still something that I'm still working out. My son, my eldest son is 7. So, you know, it really is just a growing thing. Like you just can change and do new things and try new curriculums, and it's just constant. But I wouldn't change it. Like I love having them home and knowing that they're here and knowing where they are and what they're doing. Like, you know, and honestly, it's not even as full on as you'd think. Like it's like a couple of hours a day. You can do all day schooling if you want, but really, if you're really like super focused, they can only handle like 2 to 3 hours of schooling because
we've done some homeschooling with him. And it's over in like an hour.
Yeah.
But I've also fallen off of it a little bit just because I also have chronic illness. And so the prep that I would have to do the night before became way too much for me with this curriculum. And so, you know, obviously maybe we just need to find something else, but it's if we do end up doing it, we're going to have to find some kind of a balance, as well as how do I actually educate a special needs child with learning delays, because he has them. And we have a whole debate because he needs to start kindergarten this year. But so it's just one of those like tricky things in parenting after loss, of how much do you let go, because eventually we are going to have to let go completely when they move out and they go to college or whatever they decide to do, if college is even still a thing when he's 18. Because a lot more people are choosing not to go to college. But eventually we have to let him go. But I also feel like he's only 5 right now, so it's okay that I'm still a little bit more protective of him and his sister. I'm especially protective of his sister, I think, because she's a girl. And she's so tiny, like she's so small for her age. She's tiny and she's cute, and she's actually a lot more like Judah than her brother is. She even looks like him. Her brother does not look like him very much at all. I think they have the same nose, and that's about it. But you know, eventually we do have to let go in some respect, whether it's we put them in school or when they move out or when they go to their first summer camp or something like that. But personally, it's something I'm not ready to do. I'm going to have to be ready because he's going to his school, but he was supposed to start today, but he's sick. So he's probably going to start on Wednesday. So I have a few more days to process. But so I feel like parenting after loss, pregnancy after loss, whole books could be written, it still wouldn't be enough.
Oh yeah.
To describe all the nuances and everything you go through, even at every single stage, like even just deciding to put Arthur in the nursery when he was a baby in church. And like we got to the point where like he wouldn't just sleep through the service on my lap anymore. Like he was wiggling around and like wanting to go places and make noises. And my husband's like, yeah, we're probably at the point where he needs to go. And I'm like, but I'm not ready to give him over to somebody else, because, you know, there were so many times I gave Judah over to somebody else for surgery and had to watch them walk away with him. And I had to leave him every single night. And like, even just that, like my husband would sometimes have to like physically pull me out of the hospital because I would not leave. And he's like, you need to go eat. You need to go sleep. Like he's the only reason I'm pretty sure I slept an 8. And not in the hospital room. And like, you know, we didn't do it. Our friend did it for us, but handing your baby over for the final time. And like, you know, I could only imagine them walking away with him. And, you know, we saw him again at his funeral. But that was it. And like just that final time of just leaving him. And then you translate that trauma and that just feeling into handing your baby over for an hour for a church service to somebody in the nursery who you know is safe and you know will take great care of him. But you're still just that anxiety of he's out of my sight. What if something happens? and I'm not there to stop it. I'm not there to protect him. And that hasn't gone away as he's gotten older. It's gotten easier, but it still hasn't gone away. Like every time I drop him off at his Sunday school, I'm like watching him as he goes and like walking out a little bit slower. And it's just, you just kind of have to make yourself at some point, I feel like. But yeah, parenting after loss, pregnancy after loss, everything after loss is just hard. And you have to learn to live with your hard. Yeah.
Yeah. I think as well, just like giving yourself, like you said, grace and like leniency in terms of like, okay, what can I handle? Like, what can I push myself to do? Because you don't have to do it all at once. Like, you don't have to like be like, okay, he's going to go to school, he's going to do after school clubs, he's going to, you know, because all those things, like, yeah, you're leaving them for longer and you're feeling that, you know, anxiety. And so just, yeah, take it easy and like, no, you can change your mind as well. Like if you send him to school and you're like, no, actually, this is not working, I don't like this, you know, you can change your mind, even if he enjoys it.
Yeah.
Or seems to enjoy it. You know, we're allowed to change our minds. But yeah, it could be so tricky with loss and pregnancy after loss, and yeah, everything. It's just motherhood. I've worked that out. It's motherhood. Motherhood is hard.
It's so hard. And then you add that extra layer and it feels impossible. And like, learn to give yourself grace, learn to make yourself move forward where you need to. And if you feel like you're ready, but you're just not quite there, do it anyway. And do it scared. And eventually it will feel easier. The anxiety will still be there, but it'll feel easier. And I feel like that's the best parenting after loss advice I can give.
Yeah.
5 years in to parenting after loss.
No, that's so good.
Yeah.
The last question I want to ask is just, how do you check your husband's breathing?
No, mainly because he snores. So I know what he's
You don't have to.
There have been times though where he stopped snoring for a good few minutes and I'm like poking him. I'm like, you still breathing?
Yeah, see, I check everyone now. I'm just like listening in to like everyone, and I can discern and distinguish between each breath, like who's breathing, because we share a room with the kids still. We live in a small place, and I don't know, we kind of like all of us being together. It's like, you know, tribal, right? But yeah, he I checked all of them.
Yeah, my husband snores pretty loud. So there have been nights I'm like smacking him because I want him to stop snoring because I cannot fall asleep. But then there's also been times where he stopped and I'm like, okay, are you still alive? And then he starts snoring again. I'm like, okay, you're fine.
Great. Yeah, no, my husband sometimes will snore, mainly when he's sleeping on his back. So I just get him to turn on his side. I'm like, you're snoring, you're breathing weird. Turn on your side. Turn on your side. But yeah, I didn't actually really like watch his breathing as much. You know, it wasn't really a thing until my losses. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like, you know, everything just became heightened in terms of like losing and like, you know, and I used to say to my kids, you know, I can't make another you, like, be careful and stuff. And it was just a thing I said. And now I'm like, I can't make another one of you, like, you know, and I'm just so on it. And it's just so strong. It's really difficult to be that kind of more calm parent that I wanted to be when they
I wanted to be such a calm, fun parent. I am not. I am the anxiety-ridden parent. I will say with my husband, after we had our first loss, if I didn't hear from him after a certain period of time, like when he was at work or on his way home, I would get so anxious. And I even still do this. It takes a longer period of time now, but because I know like our daughter has swiped his phone. But like,
oh, sorry, hang on. Yeah, here. My little girl's just woken up. Here, hit my phone. There you go, darling.
You're fine. I 100% understand.
It's really early, so she's like half asleep.
Yeah, so there was even points where I would like start, if I hadn't heard from him, I would start looking up, has there been a bus crash? Like,
Oh,
is and like we got to the point where he was like, because I don't have a college degree, and like that was a big point of like, how if you die, how do I support myself? And so he's like got life insurance to try to ease that anxiety for me. Um, like it's I will like after that first loss, before I had like other kids to worry about, and before I knew, hey, he can take care of himself, it's okay. Um, I would get so much anxiety, just like he would make sure to text me during the day while he was at work. And um even now when he's at work or he's on his way home and it's a little bit later than I think he should be home, that's when I start calling and get a little more anxiety, but it's a lot less than it has been with
no,
him.
no, it's I was so shocked when I realized that I had so much more anxiety over him and his safety. I'm like, what? Like, he's an adult man. I shouldn't
I
have
know
to
he
worry
takes care of
about
himself.
that. Yeah.
But it's just everybody that we got that is so important to you and is so close to you.
Oh yeah.
Like you just fear losing everyone and everything. I even fear losing my dogs. Like one of them not so much because he's a bit of a pain, but the other one definitely.
Oh no, I love that. And it's so true. Like it just is. Yeah. Oh, and one thing I was gonna say as well, like, of course you'd be more fierce with Judah. Like, of course, because you had to fight for him,
Mhm.
to fight with him. So you will
Yeah.
be, and you haven't had to have that same fight with your kids that are here on earth. Like you just haven't
Yeah.
had to fight like that. And so you won't have the same fierceness that was necessary, but it's there, it's waiting. So if anything ever oh, God forbid, like hopefully never anything bad happens again, but if anything really like full on happens, you're gonna know what to do. You're gonna be that bear mama again. So she's waiting in the wings. She's yeah, you've got this. Like you're amazing. Like you're so strong. I know you don't always feel strong
Oh
because
no,
like,
definitely not.
but you are really strong. And to mamas who are looking at you, like we're looking at you going, wow, like you're just amazing. You're here and you're fighting and you're like telling us about it. And it's amazing that you're sharing your story and telling people and giving other people the strength too, because just sharing your story shows people, one, you can survive it,
Mhm.
and two, that it's possible to have living children after having gone through something like that. And, you can still get through those days and be there and present, because I know sometimes it is hard to be present for your kids when you have kids after loss. Like after loss, I was not there for like 2 months.
Yeah.
And it was real. I felt so bad. Like you feel so bad, but then you can't, there's only so much you can physically and mentally take. you
Mhm.
know I had a lot of people step in and help out, and it was nice, but at the same time I feel like maybe I just kind of slipped further in because I knew I could. But yeah, it's so important. So thank you so much for sharing, and thank you so much for
Yes.
everything that you're doing in the community to help people like feel better and kind of have that support, because we're never going to let go of this loss. We're never gonna forget. It's always going to live with us now, and just having someone who understands that is amazing.
Yeah. It makes all the difference in the world. And like I've told other people before, like even if 1,000 people on Instagram told me you should not be talking about this, and I've had comments that are like, you should keep this to yourself. This is something very private. You should not be talking about this. And like, I don't care, because even if one mom messages me and says, hey, I feel like I can get out of bed in the morning and I can keep going because of you and what you talked about, then that makes it all worth it, even if it's only ever that one mom. And like I've had so many messages to that respect, and I'm like, I don't care that you don't think I should talk about this, because there are so many people that the thing that's been surprising to me is the people who lost babies 40, 50 years ago, who are reaching out to me and saying, I never talked about this before I found you. And I finally feel like I can talk about it. I finally feel like I can grieve this. And like that just makes it also worth it. And like, I don't care if there are a million trolls, like, it doesn't matter to me, because if one person doesn't have to feel how I felt after I had my loss with Jack, just isolated and alone, and like there's nobody in the world who cares, then that is 110% worth it.
Yeah.
And I will keep going, even if it's just for that one person. So it's definitely become a bit of a life mission for me, of not just talking about grief, but also just talking about things that are hard in motherhood, because it's been really hard for me. And parenting with having chronic illness, and parenting with having special needs kids, and all the extra anxiety that that brings. And like, I don't care how like uncomfortable it makes them, because I feel like as moms, we're told not to talk about these things. Motherhood just has to be perfect all the time, and we should just be grateful we have kids, or you chose to have kids. Like, you can't complain about this. I'm like, yes, I can, because it's still hard. And that doesn't mean I'm not grateful. It just means I'm having a hard day, So it's, to me, something that is very, very important that is talked about, and the stigmas are broken on, because we have way too much of a mental health crisis to allow that kind of thing to continue.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, like you have like older people contacting you saying how they've held on. I mean, imagine holding on to that for years, like
No,
that long. That's awful. And then not
3 years
having
was too long for me. Like,
yeah, like that's just I couldn't imagine like just holding on to that initial like feeling, like when you know, and not dealing with it, like not putting it somewhere, like, and people have done that clearly, like that's crazy. Wow, like but I have been learning that grief is something, and trauma is something that we have to actively move through. You can ignore it, but it's still there, and it's still going to rear its ugly head. You actually have to actively deal with it, which is horrible, and I'd rather not, and all of us would rather not deal with it. But we have to, so great.
and if you don't deal with trauma and grief, like processing through it, it's going to show up in your body, and tight muscles and sickness and a depressed immune system. Like, I think one of the things I didn't understand is just how much it affects your entire body. And I've even read, like, I have PCOS, and I've even read that like the rates of people who have had traumatic events in their lives of then getting PCOS is higher, because it just messes up so much of your body. And people, I feel like, don't realize that grief and trauma is a whole body thing. It's not just your mental health, it's a whole body thing. And even moving through, like I moved through, like dealing with chronic illness, but also dealing with my mental health, has brought me into a better place. But you also have to kind of put those two in conjunction, I feel like, as well. Like, it's not just one or the other. I've come to learn that you have to deal with your whole body and how everything relates to your whole body, not just separating things out. Like, I mean, I don't know how it is in Australia, but in healthcare here, like, everything is a separate discipline. Like, they don't look at everything as a whole, it's separate. And you can't really do that. And the same goes for grief and trauma. Like, it affects all of you, it affects everything in your life, and you have to deal with it to get everything else better, in addition to also handling your physical health, and supporting your physical health. So that's my little 10-second spiel on full body health, but which is, again, something I've just learned over the years, and it's been it's been a journey, it's been a process. And maybe someday I'll write it all down if I can ever collate it all together. But yeah, it's something that affects at this point almost everyone in the world, because we all went through the trauma of the pandemic. And I've seen like a shift in the world since that happened. And already being a trauma survivor, I'm like, this is a trauma response. Like,
Yeah.
so many things are a trauma response. And I don't think people realize it, because there's so little education on what trauma is and how it affects you, and how even small things can add up over time to big trauma in your life. So, yeah, that's my little spiel on health and trauma. And
Yeah, so true. Yeah, no, it is true. And I have seen a lot of like trauma responses from people, especially after COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to talk about it most of the time, because I'm just like, it just irritates me. Like I'm actually annoyed by everything that happened in 2020.
Yeah,
And
I am too. Like I have so many little tangents I can go off on about 2020.
yeah,
I
so
feel
many.
like everyone is, because it's a trauma response.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't come out in one way, it's going to come out in another.
So
Yeah.
true. Is there anything that you might want to say to anyone who's maybe in the throes of loss right now, and they're maybe pregnant after loss and they're just struggling and going through it? Is there anything that you might want to sort of say to them to kind of help them move through?
This is something I didn't understand for a long time, because I was like, what does this even mean? But give yourself a lot of grace. Like, you are going through so much, and there is just so much you can beat yourself up for, and so much you can blame yourself for, and so much you can hate the world for. But, and this was something that came to me a couple weeks ago, is forgive yourself for what you didn't know then that you know now. Because I know so much now that I didn't know then. And if I could go back, I might be able to change the ending, but we can't. And I might be able to make this different, or make this different, or even just like I've had to have 3 C-sections. And like, I hate that I've had 3 C-sections. I hate C-sections in general. They're so traumatic for me. Even like my daughter's, which was the calmest one I had. But like, I'm like, if I had just gone back and hired the doula, or if I had just gone back, and I'm like, no, you have to, you know this now. You didn't know it then, and that's okay. And you have to forgive yourself and go through the process of giving yourself grace and forgiving yourself for those things. And it might, wherever they are, sound stupid right now, or make no sense, or just be like, I really don't want to do that. And it's okay if you're not ready to receive that message, because I wasn't for a long time. I had so many people tell me, give yourself grace, give yourself grace. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, how do I even do that? Like, I don't understand. But like, as I've gone on, I have definitely learned what that means and what it looks like for me. And then, and this was something that was a big turning point for me last year. So if you are religious, there is a book called When God Doesn't Fix It. And so one of the biggest things I could not reconcile, and I still have trouble reconciling, is why didn't God fix it? Like, when we were told Judah didn't have kidneys, I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. Just when we get that next ultrasound, just let there miraculously be fluid and miraculously be kidneys. And there wasn't. And so this is a book written by the Christian artist Laura Story, whose husband is severely disabled. And it didn't start out that way when they were married. And she also went through the process of, why didn't you fix this? And it's just, she so beautifully lays out like why God doesn't fix things, and like accepting it. And I feel like a lot of like learning about grace came from this book. And a lot of turning points for me came from reading this book. It's like the only book I finished in like 6 years, because I have kids. But like, I was so motivated to finish it because it was just so good. And just finding like that, like, this is okay. And finding, even if it was a different situation, this is okay. And like having that perspective shift that came with reading that book. But yeah, definitely give yourself so much grace and read that book, because it made such a difference to have my perspective shift. And I know it sounds repetitive and it might sound stupid, but give yourself a lot of grace and forgive yourself for what you did not know, because it can be so hard to forgive yourself for what you did not know, especially when you know it now and you think, if I had just known, I could have fixed this, I could have made it better, I could have prevented this, I could have prevented my son having a stroke in my arms. Like, I've gone through that day over and over again in my head. If I'm like, if I had just gone to the hospital sooner, if I had just fought harder, if I had just screamed at the top of my lungs until they listened to me. And I had to, and I still have trouble. I still have to go back and forgive myself again for not doing that. And it's been 6 years. But every time we get close to that day, I'm like, why didn't I do this? You just have to forgive yourself, because otherwise you will become your own worst enemy, and you will sit in that, and it'll just grow and grow into like contempt and hate for yourself. And you will no longer be comfortable with yourself and comfortable in your own body, and everything, and hate takes over so fast. Hate and anger. And you do not, as much as it might not feel like it right now, you do not want to spend your life mad at yourself, and you do not want to spend your life mad at the world. And it is so much better when you find that forgiveness and that grace for yourself. And I feel like we as the moms, we often have to, we forgive everybody else before we forgive ourselves. And we give everybody else grace before we give grace to ourselves. And I think we actually need to look at it backwards and start with ourselves. Nobody else matters. You are the center of your grief. You are the center of your loss. Like, there's the circles of loss. And you, your husband, your baby, you are at that center. And that is what is important. Nobody else outside that center is important. And I wish I had worried less about other people's feelings and less about how other people were handling my loss, and more just focused on forgiving myself and giving myself grace. Even though for years I was like, what does that mean? It's so stupid. Like, what is it? But when you get there, it is so much better. And it makes you such a different person to no longer hate yourself for what you did or didn't do back then.
Yeah. My husband, the voice of reason, comes out and says things like, you did your best.
Mm.
You did your best. You didn't go into it to fail. We never do that. We go in to do our best and to do what we can do. And he was like, if you'd known what this thing would have resulted in this, you wouldn't have done it. Or if you found out, what the issue was, and you knew that eating a slice of bread would kill the baby, you wouldn't have done that. You would have done something different. You would have eaten something else. And he was like, so you don't know, and we won't know, like, whether something would have made a difference or not. Or what the cause was. Like, for us, we don't know why we lost two babies, but he was like, we will never know. And he's like, so you're gonna have to just move through this and know that you did your best, and that's it. And I was just, okay. And that has been sticking with me, and I've been keeping that in my head. Like, I don't know what happened, and if I knew something was gonna do that, I wouldn't have done it. So yeah.
And like, you never, like, the other thing I tell people is, it's not your fault, because you never maliciously intended to hurt your baby. And you did everything you could do to love your baby, to take care of your baby, especially in the case of like miscarriage or stillbirth. And like, I mean, personally, I've never had a stillbirth, but I had a miscarriage. And I can kind of extend those feelings. Like, I will never personally know what it feels like to have a stillbirth, but I can sort of imagine. And like with Jack, I was like, oh, I did this. Oh, I did this. Oh, I did this. And that caused my miscarriage. And like, I'm like, no, I loved him. I did the best that I could. And I never intended for this to happen. And I never intentionally did something to hurt him. And so it is not my fault, because it was out of the realm of my control. And I feel like letting go of that control, in which I'm a control freak. So like, that is something that is so hard for me. But like, letting go of that, like, if I can just control this, if I can just will the outcome somehow. And maybe I didn't do it hard enough, but there's nothing we can do. We can just hope and trust and pray that it turns out okay. And the rest of it is not our fault. Unless like you physically did something to intentionally hurt your baby, like, which is a whole other animal. And I really don't want to blame those people either. But if you didn't do anything to intentionally hurt your baby, if all you ever did was try to help your baby, it's not your fault. And you just kind of have to repeat that to yourself. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. Because I lived with that guilt of I did something to cause my miscarriage for so long. And I did something to cause Judah not to have kidneys for so long. And you just have to let it go. And sometimes things just happen because we live in a broken world. And these things, unfortunately, just happen. And there's nothing we can do to prevent them. And they're horrible and they're terrible. And I wish they did not happen, of course. But it's not your fault. And I feel like those are the two biggest messages I can give is forgive yourself and it wasn't your fault. Like, and I feel like those are the two biggest things that I have struggled with. And I still struggle with them from time to time, but it's gotten better since I have learned these things and come to these conclusions.
Yeah, same for me. And it really has been just talking to so many women and talking about loss and my loss and their loss and understanding it, talking about it really does help. A lot of people tell me to write it down. I'm going to try and do that. I was going to say, maybe you should try writing some stuff down while you're pregnant. Cause like some of the stuff you said, like is really, really good. Like in terms of like, getting through it. And you said you have the disassociation thing. So that could be really potentially really helpful for you if you were to write it down. Like maybe that would help you work through whatever is in your subconscious that you can't hear. Because it's hard, isn't it? Like, especially if you've got that. But it's a safety mechanism that your brain is putting in place to protect you from another pregnancy and going through the anxiety and the pain of that again. So, hats off to the brain because it's powerful.
It does a lot to try to protect you. I went to nursing school, so I'm a little bit of an anatomy nerd. And like, I've learned so much about what the brain does to protect us from our trauma. Like I can't recall memories of Judah. I can recall memories right up to the point where I see him, except for some reason, the most traumatic ones. But you'd think this would be the ones that they're completely blank. There have been a lot of times where I've had to go to my husband and I look at a picture. I'm like, okay, what was happening here? Like, what exactly happened? Like, I have a vague recollection based on what I know from the picture or like the video, but like what actually happened. And it's my brain's way of trying to protect me and trying to keep me from reliving that trauma and reliving everything that just hurts so much around Judah and around his life. And, that also is not your fault. That's an involuntary thing that your brain automatically does. And like, I had to reconcile. That's another thing I had to reconcile with myself, that maybe someday the memories will come back, or maybe I'll have to rely on my husband's memory for the rest of my life. I don't know. But like, there are stories I know about Judah because he's told me those stories, and then I remember the stories. And then for some reason, those last few days are like seared in my brain. And I'm like, these are the ones you need to protect me from. Like, all the other ones are fine. But it's just, if you get to know your brain and how it responds to trauma and what it does, you can also see that, sometimes the way you react isn't your fault. Sometimes the way you can't remember things isn't your fault. And it's not you forgetting your baby. It's your brain protecting you from that. And there are therapies you can go through and techniques you can use to help you get these things back and hopefully maybe eventually turn that trauma response off. But it takes time, and it takes just knowing this isn't something I'm intentionally doing. I'm not intentionally forgetting my baby. Like, I'm not intentionally locking myself out of these memories. It's my brain doing it automatically as a trauma response, as a way to protect me. And yeah, so all of that is just so interesting. And, the more the more you learn, I feel like the better it gets. Not necessarily grief gets better, but you understand yourself more. And you understand what your body is doing and how it's responding.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction to make. Like, you still grieve, we're still going to grieve, the grief won't go away, in terms of like, you're still going to feel it every now and then. Like, it might not be constant like it is now, but like, there'll be days, there'll be moments, and that's okay, and we have to be okay with that. And yeah, I like what you said about the brain. Like, it's not your fault if you're blocking those things out. It really isn't. But
It
it's
comes down
beautiful.
to what we can control and what we cannot control. And it's letting go of that control that is really hard.
Yeah, it's beautiful that your husband can do that for you, like give you the memory, bring them back for you. And maybe that's even more beautiful for you, because then you can connect with your husband and go for it with your husband, and it's not just you remembering it all the time. Like, it's him reliving it with you. And and yeah, I mean, obviously you'd still want the memories, but if it
It's
has
a way
to be
for us
limited.
to connect over Judah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking with me and sharing your story. I know I've kept you for a long time.
It's okay. I can be a bit of a chatterbox when it comes to these things, because there's things that I could talk about all day long, and this is one of them.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Is there, sorry, like, do you have any services and things like that you wanted to talk about or mention, like in terms of how you help people? Or
So I have my account, Broken Beautiful Mamahood, which is where it really grew and took off, talking about Judah, and a few reels have gone viral. I'm trying to start to shift that a little bit to more just talking about my kids, more about parenting after loss, parenting with special needs, parenting with chronic illness, because I felt a little bit stifled with just sticking to the grief topic, and feeling like I do best when I talk about the things that are going on in my life. And so I have kind of put up kind of like a PSA, like, if you don't want to hear about this, it's okay if you unfollow me. Like, I don't mind. Like, it's what's best for you. But I also have another account, Brushes and Fiber. It's for my Etsy shop. So I make stickers and prints, and I have a few t-shirts and stuff, specifically for lost moms, NICU moms, medical moms. And that one I have dedicated to be exclusively of loss. And I will not show my kids on that account. I will not talk about too much. I talk about pregnancy after loss a little bit, but I mostly try to keep it focused on just loss, for if they need that space that is just loss. Versus my other account, where I do talk about my kids, and I do share about, our daily life, and show the messes that my children have made all over my house, and how it's just hard for me sometimes. But I also know, like, right after Judah died, I would get so annoyed if people would complain about their kids. So I'm like, at least your kids are alive. And I know some people just need that space. So there's Brushes and Fiber, where if you just need that lost space, or if you're okay with, or you need the hope of seeing someone who's parenting after loss, there's Broken Beautiful Mamahood. And I have started to talk about pregnancy on it a little bit more now that I'm starting to get slowly more comfortable talking about this pregnancy. It's been weird, and it's also been a bit of a rebellion against my brain to actually talk about it. So those are the two things I do. I do have a website that goes with Broken Beautiful Mamahood. Technically it's a blog, but I don't use it a ton because my kids keep me busy. But it does have some helpful things on there, especially if you're trying to find a way to help somebody who's experienced a loss. It has Judah's full story on it. Some ways to reset if you're having a bad day, just things that I feel like need to be in a more permanent space and more explained out, I guess. Can't find the right word for that. But those are the three things that I have. And I am always available, well, as much as I can be with 2 kids, but I am always willing to talk through anything that someone needs to talk through. And if you need to talk through something, you just send me a message. It may take me a little bit to get to it because sometimes my message requests get kind of lost because I get a lot of them, but it is definitely something that I will take the time to talk to people about, and definitely not something that I mind doing at all. And actually, it's even helpful for me to do. So other than my stickers, I don't do any paid services. I don't feel like grief and loss should be something that I have to pay, somebody has to pay for to get help for. And personally, like if it weren't for the fact that my stickers cost money to make, I would just give them to people. Honestly. So yeah, so those are the things that I do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so wonderful that you've just kind of, given that open invitation to message you and to be the voice, like in the sort of darkness that someone can kind of cling to in that moment. So thank you for doing that. Because I know how hard it is to be that voice. And to have that many messages would be pretty full on. I've heard a couple of women who I've spoken to have gotten a lot of messages, and they're like, I'm thinking of starting like a blog or something. I'm like, yes, you should do that. Then you can redirect just to certain posts, like so you don't have to like continually say the same things. She's like, yeah, sometimes I copy and paste. I don't want to, but
sometimes, like, especially with like the question, there's a lot of frequently asked questions. That's another thing that's on my blog. I'm like, I don't want to explain this out over and over and over again. It's complicated. Judah's story is complicated. It's long. Like whenever people are like, oh, tell us your story, I'm like, I don't want to because I'll take up all the time because it's so complicated. Like,
yeah.
But so there are times where I can redirect them to, hey, just go check this out on my frequently asked questions, or I can even just go in there and like copy and paste from it. Sorry, my dogs have apparently decided to fight right outside my door. If you can hear that. Yeah, so it's, but I never want anybody to feel like they don't have somebody they can turn to and talk to, which is why I put that invitation out there. Just send me a message. If you feel like you don't know who to talk to, you don't know who to go to, just send me a message. I will be there and I will help as best I can. I may not have all the answers, but I can at least be there for you. And I feel like that was something I needed in the early days after my first loss, and I didn't have. And I never want anybody to feel that way.
Yeah, and it really is one of those things, like you do feel really alone, and just having that one person that just answers that message, it makes a massive difference in the trajectory of like your feelings and that movement towards healing and acceptance. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll send you the live schedule so you can see if you can make it to any of them. It's going to be an EST time, so hopefully you can. But yeah, we've got quite a lot of chats, so hopefully you'll want to speak into one of them. If not, that's all good, because we've got a lot of mamas who are either pregnant or I'm probably going to be on bed rest like at that point, so I end up on bed rest with every pregnancy, the ones that I actually
at some point too in every pregnancy. It's ridiculous.
You're just like, oh, really, like
you're like, I just want to go do stuff, like, can I just, and they're like, no.
Yeah, for me it's like I contract, like I start having contractions, like full on ones, like they're really painful, and I'm like, what? Like with my first kid, like I had the early long-term like labor, so I was dilating over a long period of time. So I was like getting like painful contractions for like 5 hours a day, and and then I was like, okay, so what's going on? And they're like, you're like a centimeter. I'm like, are you serious? And then it was like another week, they're like, you're like 2 centimeters. And I'm like, okay, I mean, this is moving along.
Well, she's not really going anywhere.
Oh, and then when I finally got to like where I felt was active labor, like, because it just carried on after the 5 hours. It was like, wow, okay, oh no, this is go time. This must be go time because it's more than 5 hours. I went in, they're like, you're 3 centimeters. I'm like, you kidding? Like, like what? I've been doing this for ages.
I know.
Tell me
my
I'm
daughter-
5 or 8.
I know. My daughter, I had prodromal labor with her for a month before she was born. And it was like all the time, and I wasn't sleeping. And I'm like, surely I'm gonna have this baby soon. And they're like, you're like a fingertip. I'm like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was getting up every hour on the hour to go to the toilet, like, because my bladder was so ridiculously small, clearly, because the baby was like pushing up against it. So I'm going to toilet every hour. Then I'm having contractions for like 5 hours. And then, yeah, nothing's happening. They're like, it's like half centimeter more or whatever it was. And it was just so annoying the whole time.
I know. I was like, just get this baby out. And like, when we got to the point where she started moving less, it had been over a month. And like, even then they were like, well, we won't induce you because after 2 C-sections, like the risk is just too high for hemorrhage. And then like my doula came, and like I was having contractions like while they're keeping me in the hospital, because like, well, we can't send you home, but we also can't induce you. And I'm like, okay, so maybe labor's just gonna like actually start. And like my doula was helping me and stuff. And then it just like petered out overnight. And I was just like, it's this again. And so like by the morning, we were like, okay, fine, just do the C-section. Like, we don't want it, but like, just okay. Because clearly she's not coming out on her own, at least not at this point. And otherwise, you're just going to keep me here, and I don't want to be here for a while. So it's not exactly the same, but I definitely understand.
It's what we can handle as well. Like, there's only so much pain we can deal with. Like, I mean, I've had two children naturally, like no drugs, nothing, and natural home birth, like out the hoo-ha. And I can tell you, like, we can do pain. Okay, we can do it. Like, if I can do natural birth with no painkillers, and I'm terrible with pain, I can tell you any woman can do it if she's able. So yeah, but it's not, none of it's fun. It's just really painful.
I was talking to a friend once, and we were pregnant at the same time, and I was like, we were talking about birth, and I was like, personally, I'm just not thrilled with either way it has to come out. Like, neither way it's a good option. She's like, that just sums it up so well.
Like, a hole this small, head this big. No.
I know, my kids have big heads. Like, I'm kind of glad in the end, like,
that's probably why, though. That's probably why you had to have the C-section, because they say,
so like, with Judah, when my water broke early, I was actually dilating pretty fast. And his heart rate was falling with each contraction, because at that point he didn't have any fluid anymore. So it was compressing the cord, and he was breech. And so they were like, yep, no, we're going. Yeah. Like, at that point. And then with Arthur, I tried to have a VBAC. My doctor even induced me. And like, it was like 18 hours of like almost nothing. Like, even with Pitocin and like everything we tried. And like, one of those looking back on things, like, there was a lot more I could have been doing, like positional wise and like stuff like that, but I just had no idea. And like my nurse was like never there. So like my nurse was like, no help. So like after like 18 hours, like they had broken my water. My doctor had already let me go longer than she wanted to. She was just like, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't let you go any longer. And so at that point we decided to have the C-section. And then with my daughter, I actually felt fairly confident that it was finally going to be like the baby I had naturally, because like she was the first one that I like faced with. She was the first one that dropped, like all that. But she was sunny side up. And like got a few things done to like get her to move, and she just flipped back. And in the end, I think she was like stuck in my hip. Because she came out with like a torticollis, and like she just wasn't coming out. Even though like it'd been like a month and a half of like contractions, and like, so I give her an A for effort. Like, I just think she was kind of stuck.
Yeah,
So
she didn't work out where the canal was, you know. Yeah.
And like, knowing her, she wanted to do things on her own terms, and like our timeline didn't work for her. So
So
like,
true.
knowing her.
So
So
true. I know I've been lucky that all my babies have been kind of like they get their head down there and everything. So I'm like walking like I need to go to the loo like all the time right at the end of the pregnancy. I mean, that's partly why I'm on bed rest when I'm in third trimester, like, which I've just entered now. So I don't know when I'm going to be on bed rest. I can feel it already. Like I'm already like I've been getting like 10 like Braxton Hicks. To be honest, they feel like contractions to me. They're painful, like you know.
But they still call him Braxton Hicks.
Yeah, you know, and I felt it in my back, like the whole thing. I've had like 10 in like within an hour, and I was like, well, that's not that that's not normal for Braxton Hicks, and like, you know, so I've been like half freaking out, but then my husband's like, no, this happened with all of them, you know, this has happened with every pregnancy. So again, voice of reason. So then I'm like, okay, so I don't need to panic, like, but is she okay? And then I can feel her kicking, and then I'm like, okay, you know. Or if I don't feel her kicking, I'm like, she hasn't kicked for ages, like I don't know, she's not, you know. We've named her Grace because I need to give myself grace.
That's my daughter's middle name. Well, one of them. All of my kids have multiple middle names, but we have sometimes we call her Ellie Grace.
Yeah.
And leave out the first middle name, but
yeah, sometimes it's important to like name your kid something that you need to remember.
Well, all my kids, like, their names have like meaning behind them. Like Judah was from the verse, "This time I'll praise the Lord." And so like I decided, like, you know, no matter what happens, this time I'll praise the Lord. And because I didn't with my first loss. And then Arthur is actually named after one of Judah's surgeons, who loved Judah. Like, he would come over just to talk to him and like pat his back. And like, I've never seen a surgeon act like this ever, even like to this day. And then, but he was like Russian, so his name was whatever Arthur is in Russian, but nobody could pronounce it, so he had everybody just call him Arthur. And then when we were pregnant, we found out Arthur means brave as a bear, and Judah's nickname was Judah Bear. And so we were like, yeah, that's his name. Like, before we even knew he was a boy, we were like, that's his name. And then Ellie, her full name's Eleanor. But there was an artist, Christian artist named Ellie Holcomb, whose songs really helped me through a really dark period of my grief. So I was like, if I ever have a girl, which I thought was impossible because I'd already had, like, we thought our first baby was a boy. So I'm like, I've already had 3 boys. Like, I'm not going to have a girl. So she was definitely shocked, but she was a girl. But I wanted to name her Eleanor, but Ellie for short. My husband was like, no, like, I don't want a name that ends in an R. Like, he had all these other ideas. And I'm like, I'm gonna win. It took 3 days in the end after she was born. And I was like, I feel like she looks like an Eleanor, because there were other names like we were genuinely considering, and I would like try like calling her that name. And I'm like, yeah, this just doesn't really fit. And I'm like, no, she's an Eleanor. And he's like, okay, but we're not calling her Ellie. Like, Eleanor is her name. And he was the first one to call her Ellie.
Yeah. It will, you know, sometimes it happens like that, you know. It's good. It's good. You know, the only kids with names that really truly have like meaning that we decided was the ones that we've lost. Because our first 3, we were just like, oh, we'll just name them this. We'll just, you know, because it was just like a, you know, my first child, his name's Theodore, and then I found out that means like gift from God.
Yeah.
And then my second child, we named her Ava, and that is like bird-like and like inquisitive, and she really is. And then my youngest son, we named him Ethan, and that means like sturdy, strong, and he's like the strongest, like big build, you know. So it's been really weird. But yeah, with the losses, we named them, you know, very meaningful names. My first one, I said to my son, I said to my son and my daughter, I was like, do you want to help me name the baby? Because I don't know what to name the baby. My husband didn't feel comfortable, and, you know, so we were just like, you know, I'll let the kids help me. And my son was like, Joy.
Aw.
And I was like, why? And he just looked at me like, you know, you should know this, Mum. Like, why? You know, he's like, because the baby would be joyful in heaven with Jesus.
Aw.
I was like, oh, to hold it in.
I know. Oh my gosh.
But it was beautiful. And then our second loss I called Patience, because I was like, I need to be patient, you know. And it was I think I named the baby Patience before I knew I was losing the baby. And then this one I was like, this is going to be Grace. And I was like, if it's a girl, her name's Grace. If it's a boy, we'll have to reconsider. But
If this one's a boy, I have no idea what we're calling it.
well, someone was like Grayson, and I was like, that's perfect. Wonderful.
There you go.
So if they got it wrong and it's actually a boy, then I'll know what to name the baby.
Right. You can just switch up real quick.
Grayson, there you go, done. But
with our daughter, like we did the blood test, and so the blood test tells us it's a girl, but I didn't fully believe she was a girl until the ultrasound was like, this is a girl.
yeah, there's no winky dink.
Yeah. Because I was in a little bit of denial that I was actually having a girl, because I wanted a girl for so long. I actually cried when I found out Judah was a boy, because I wanted him to be a girl so bad, but like he was perfect the way he was. But
yeah,
I think I might cry if this one's a boy.
You know,
it's like,
oh, it's a thing,
I'm
isn't
like,
it?
Arthur is enough boy for this house. Like, he's enough boy. Like, I just want another Ellie. She's sweet, she's snuggly. She can get a little bit crazy, but only when she's copying her brother. Like, she feeds off his energy. So I'm like, I just want another Ellie. Like, can we just have another Ellie?
Well, I'm gonna say this, right? I don't know if it's feeding off energy, okay? Because my daughter is the same. She's like crazy sometimes, like crazy energy. My eldest son, he's really quite calm most of the time. Like he's, just really like in tune and really calm and like collected. Like he's really quite no, but he's really like I'd say he's quite mature for his age. And he's 7, and she's just like bouncing off the walls. She's like the bird. She's the flittering bird, like so, everywhere. Love it. It's great, but it could just be her. Like no influences at all. Just she.
I definitely think my daughter gets influenced by my son, because my son is like, first of all, she loves to copy him. Like she's a little copycat.
Yeah.
But he's just like, he's so crazy. He's either like all out, like jumping on her couch, running into the furniture, wrestling the dog, like all kinds of stuff, or he's like so focused on what he's playing that you can't get his attention.
Oh wow.
Like there's like no in between with this kid.
Nice.
And then like my daughter is still pretty calm. She'll go from like thing to thing and like kind of want to sit in your lap and just like hang out with you and read books. And then when her brother gets like super crazy and she realizes she can play the game too, she like starts amping herself up a little bit. So I think she should.
Yeah, my daughter's very into cuddles as well. She's like very cuddly and like wants to snuggle all the time, to the point where her brother runs away from her because he doesn't want to keep snuggling.
And she'll go up to her brother and like hug him, and she's like hugging him for like more than like 5 seconds. He's like, get off.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like, can you not? She's like, mwah, mwah, I just love you. And he's like,
that's enough physical touch, thanks.
Yeah, no, it's so funny. And it's things like that, I think, that help so much more with like moving through loss as well, because you can't help but enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as you like feel like, oh no, I have to be sad because of my babies that I've lost, I have to be sad. You can't, because sometimes kids do things and it's so hilarious. And it's so ridiculous that you're like,
so cute that you just can't help yourself.
Yeah, like they try and walk and then they like tip over somehow, and you're like, how did you do that? Like, I don't.
When they first learn to walk, they look like a little drunk person. Like, wow, it's just funny.
Oh, yeah, it makes it easier. It makes it easier.
It definitely makes it easier.
Yeah,
I'm so glad like we were able to have more kids. I don't know what I would have done if we didn't. Might have become a crazy dog lady.
Maybe
I
it can
mean,
work. It can work.
yeah.
It can work. Crazy dog lady works too. But yeah, I was very grateful to already have kids when I had the losses, and I I really crutched on them. Like
Yeah.
it was like a crutch. Like my youngest, he was like 2-ish, and I was just like holding on to him so much tighter than I had like before the losses. It was like, you're my baby. You're my baby. Like I still have a baby, and just crying a lot. But
Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah.
yeah, no, it's
Because Arthur was born less than a year after Judah died. I think when he was like 6 weeks old was when it was a year. And definitely I mean, it was still really hard,
oh
but
yeah,
like having a baby to hold on that first year was definitely a huge help.
because it's your baby still. Like yeah, it's not the same child, obviously, and you're still missing that other child, but you've got a child, like, so you're like, I have you, you're mine, like you're my child. Oh my gosh, and that, it is crazy. Um, yeah, and you got that contentment, like though it's not like full contentment of like, oh yeah, I feel great.
Something always feels like it's missing. And like
Yeah,
I've told people, like it doesn't really feel like home is anywhere anymore because Judah's not there.
yeah,
And like it's as close to feeling like home as it can. But like I know it's not home because home is where all my kids are, not just the kids that are living. And so it's definitely it's a strange, strange life we lead.
yeah, it is. And like knowing that the only time we're gonna have that is when we're up there, like when we're in heaven, and it's like, oh yeah. Obviously, we still have to be here because we need to be here.
Yeah. And it
We're
makes this like weird, like I'm ready to go to heaven and see Judah again, but also I don't want to leave my living kids. Like it's so weird. Like
You still have more work to do. You're not
yeah,
ready yet. You've got like lots more to do here, so we can't go anywhere. I think it's
yeah,
like just realizing, yeah, there's a lot more to be done, and God clearly wants you here for a reason, and He's got plans for you. You know, I just wish that He had plans for those babies here.
I know.
But I wouldn't be the person I am today without having gone through the hard
Yeah,
things. And I wouldn't be talking to you
yeah,
and all
for
the other
sure.
women, you know.
Yeah, there's so many people I wouldn't know if it weren't for Judah and Jack.
Mm,
And it's just this weird kind of gratefulness. You don't want it to have happened, but you're grateful that it did because it
yeah,
led you to so many places.
yeah.
So
And so many of us feel that way, and we're like, we always have to be like, we don't want it, but we are grateful. But we don't want it, but we're
yeah,
happy.
like never again, please.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's very mutual like across the whole community of lost
Yeah,
mamas. So
sure.
yeah, but I think that I say to my husband, this is God's good. This is God making good of, you know, the bad in the world, like the fallen crap of the world, like
Yeah,
these communities, these women, these amazing women, and the strength and the beauty and the character within us that just grows
yeah,
from everything, yeah, it's
yeah.
horrible and ugly, and we wouldn't wish anything like this on anyone, but there's there is beauty. There is,
Mhm.
something beautiful that blooms. It's
Yeah,
unfair.
that's the kind of the reason behind being called Broken Beautiful Mamahood, because even though it's broken, it can still be made beautiful. And like I've started and restarted a book like I don't know, 6, 7 times. I'm hoping my most recent draft is it, but I never get very far. But I do know that when I finally have the book, it's going to be called Broken Made Beautiful because I can't think of any other way to describe it.
So
Like,
mm,
but it's only made beautiful when I decided to give it up and let God handle it instead of trying to handle it myself. And so I feel like that's the big pivot point of making something broken into something beautiful. And even just like the things that moms do because they've lost their babies, it's turning something so broken into something that is beautiful and can help other people. And it's incredible what I see mamas do. And even if they don't like do something big and world changing, like even just something small, can make it all worth it. Not worth it, but
no, but can make a world of difference in another
Yeah.
person's life or in their life. And it's so true. So true. Just a small little thing can domino effect,
Yep.
Let me know if you finish that book and you
Okay.
put it out there, because I can link
I
it.
think it's currently like 7 pages long. I think this is the longest I've ever made it. So we'll see if it gets longer.
Well, probably, you're going through another pregnancy and another, time of change, and, things are likely to be added.
Yeah.
So
I think the issue before is I hadn't done enough healing work before to really, because originally it was going to be, I just write down Judah's story, and like I could never bring myself to do it. Like I would get through like, oh, here's the part about how me and my husband met and how we lost Jack and like all that, and then I would get to the part where I needed to start talking about Judah, and it was just like I would just freeze, like I just couldn't do it, and so I'd restart, and I'm like, maybe if I come at it from this way, no, it just won't work. And so I still haven't gotten to the part about Judah yet, just about my super screwed up childhood, but that's a whole different story. But both my parents are abusive.
yeah, I had one abusive, but not towards me, like in that sense, like mentally, not physically.
Yeah, my dad was physically abusive, and I didn't realize that my mom was mentally abusive until I like left home and like started to see the real world and not the world shaped by what she was shaping us into. And now I'm like, whoa. Yeah, that's like a whole different thing. So I've started talking about that, and like even that wasn't something I was ready to talk about because I was like, oh my gosh, what if my mom finds out? I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah, I think it's as well, like obviously she would have gone through trauma and changes, and her thoughts on things would have been skewed because of that trauma. But yeah, I know what you mean. And in terms of like the effects, and once you move out, yeah, it's a different reality.
Yeah, it was like my mom made it to where like everyone was wrong but her, and only she could be right, and only her version of reality was right. And like it's so weird because like she hates our husbands, even though she was the one who like gave them permission to marry us. But like as soon as they took us away and like we started getting further apart from her, like she's like, now she hates our husbands. My husband's like, I really don't care. But like I honestly think like, so the reason one of Ellie's middle names is Grace, so not right before me, but I have an older sister, and then there was an older sister before that. 10 of us are girls, so it gets a little confusing. But that baby actually died. Her name was Bethany Grace, and she died an hour and a half after she was born. And my siblings who were born before her, actually remember my parents being happy, remember them being good parents. And so what I think happened was they never talked about it, and they just internalized their grief, and it came out as mental health disorders in both of them. And my dad lashed out physically, my mom lashed out mentally, and like my mom was also like trying to deal with protecting her kids from my dad. And so honestly, I think that was the turning point, like just looking over like my family's history from what I know. As well as like there's a lot of generational trauma. Like I started doing like our family tree and like found like divorce documents citing abuse and like all kinds of stuff, like way back in like the early 1900s when like this was like unprecedented to get a divorce. And I'm like, there's just so much generational trauma in my family, and I think it all just kind of culminated there. And me and one of my sisters have been like, yep, nope, buck stops with us. And we're two of only three of my mom's kids who have kids. And I don't know how my brother's doing because he's the strong silent type, he doesn't really talk. him and his kids seem to be doing fine, but both me and my sister have, like, made the point to do the work of, like, we're not repeating the mistakes of our ancestors. And I also found, like, a lot of people are doing the same, because I feel like we know a lot more these days than we used to. But like, but back to Ellie. So her name is Eleanor Luthien Grace. She was actually born on Bethany's birthday.
Oh, wow.
So as our way of honoring my sister, we gave her middle name as well. Because originally she was going to be, like, we knew we wanted the middle name to be Luthien, Kate. And then when she was born on her birthday, I was like, I think we need to switch it to Luthien Grace. And my husband was like, that's fine. But so we had the middle name, we just didn't have the first name for a while. It's going to be like Eleanor, Lorelei, or Juliet. And she didn't look like a Lorelei, and she didn't really feel like a Juliet, so she became an Eleanor. My husband finally agreed when she was 3 days old, and I was like, we have to sign the paperwork or they're going to make us pay money to change her name later. Because they'll just put her on her paperwork, baby girl. So that was kind of the motivation he needed to finally pick a name. But yeah, so that's the reason her middle name is Grace. My sister. But yeah, there's a long history of just trauma and abuse, and so me and my sister have kind of made it our mission in life to learn about that, to stop the mistakes. Like, we don't have contact with our side of the family anymore, because we know they're still so toxic, and we're like, we don't want our kids experiencing that. My kids don't even really know they have a grandma on my side of the family. They're like vaguely aware of her because she sent them some gifts, but I stopped talking to her last summer. So this was after about a year after my first reel had gone viral, and like my sister-in-law, so my brother's wife, told me my mom was going around telling people that I was using Judah's death for attention. And I was like, yep, nope, we're not talking anymore. Because I had already I'd slowly been talking to her less, and we'd had a conversation before about, like, because she had tried to make me feel guilty that Judah had lived longer than Bethany had. And I'm like, in any of the lost world, there is no comparison game. Like, you just don't. And I'm like, and of course, when I confronted her, she was like, oh, you just took it the wrong way. I didn't mean it that way. I was like, this is my boundary. You are not allowed to talk bad about Judah, like, period. Like, that's where the mama bear came out. Like, it's one of the few times I've stood up to my mom. And like, she broke that boundary further down the road. So I was like, I'm sorry, we're done. And I don't think she's totally gotten that we're done. And like, she'll complain to my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law still lives near her, and my sister-in-law is just like, you know what you did. Like, she doesn't care for my mom's crap at all, which is great. But it's just been like this whole journey of like figuring out like how my parents' mental health disorders played into me having anxiety and depression, even going into my first miscarriage, and like how it's all developed. Like, I like to say I had trauma from the time I was born. My mom did not like me as a baby. Like, she would constantly complain to me about me as a baby, and then be like, I hope you have 12 just like you, as if that was like some kind of like curse. And like, now I'll be lucky if I have 12 kids. I don't want 12 kids, but like, it would be like a miracle if I did.
My kids want me to have 12. And I'm like, no,
not going that far. No, we were done after our daughter, and now apparently we're having 5. So, but like, it's just, yeah. So my dad actually died while Judah was in the NICU, and like, we had only just started restoring our relationship. Like, he realized he had screwed up, and like, the big difference between him and my mom is my mom still does not realize she screwed up. She still thinks she's right. And so I'm like, as long as you can't realize your mistakes, there's no relationship to be had, because you're just going to keep trying to manipulate and control me. And that's not something I can let you do anymore, because I know better and I know all your tricks. So sorry.
Yeah, I had to do the same with my dad, because he was just not, he just didn't understand, like, that he was doing the wrong thing. And they just you just have to, because you can't have that toxic, you can forgive them, but you can't have them in your kids' lives. Like, that's just not on. But but yeah, no, it's definitely a hard road and a hard journey, and it's made harder when you don't have those parents to like, you know, give you advice or help you. It's like you don't want their advice.
The way you handle it would probably not be great. So, and like I know the way she handled the grief of losing her daughter. And I'm like, I don't want to handle it that way.
I don't think that worked for you. Yeah. But no, it's crazy. And I've been like learning a lot about layers of trauma and like something called conscious parenting, which is about you going back and like reparenting yourself.
Yeah.
So like, you know, whatever you didn't get as a child, you kind of give it to yourself as an adult, giving it to yourself as a child, which is really weird, but like I think it makes a lot of sense. Like, you know, obviously we didn't have, you know, some of those things that we needed, you know, and with that trauma that we got from the abuse or whatever it was that was going on, because my dad was an abusive drunk, but like not at me, if that makes sense. Like it was later where he threatened me, and then it was like cut all ties completely. But that in itself, like that was really, you know, obviously traumatic the whole time. But yeah, it takes a lot to kind of like work through that and like understand like what issues you have from that. And obviously being a parent, you're like, mirror. And you start, I know. You're like, oh my gosh, did I just say that? I sound exactly like them.
I know. I'm like, oh crap, I just sound like my mother. No, please don't be my mother.
Yeah, like, oh. Sometimes
me and my sister have this agreement where we'd be like, yeah, you're being mom, don't do that. I'm like, it sucks when we call each other out on it, but like at the same time, it helps because we realize like it's just you don't realize you're doing it until somebody has like I want to say audacity to like call you out on it, and then you could be like, oh, and like back it up and not do it again, or at least try not to do it again.
Yeah, my husband and I have an agreement of like whenever we're doing something that is not working or like isn't right, you know, we tell each other, and we've had this like open communication of like things, and like so we've gotten less intense with it because originally we were like, you're being like your dad, like it became like a really terrible thing, like so we kind of moved away from that and kind of more like, hey honey, I don't think this is working, like you maybe approach it differently because you know it's affecting the kids, or this isn't working in our relationship. And so it's gotten much nicer because going like now it's a trigger thing, like you're being like your dad, don't ever say that, like I'm not them. You know, I'm not him. So it becomes like a, you know, a trigger, so we don't do that anymore. It's been really hard, a long road. We're like 29 now, so yeah, but we've been together 13 years, so we're kind of like at that point where we kind of like we can deal with it. Like we say sort of send me the right things, you know. Sometimes we'll mention our dads and it's like, yeah, we're not them, it's okay. But trauma sucks. Wish we didn't have to deal with it and the layers of it.
Yeah, every time I start with a new therapist, because I've started with a few new ones recently. It's long story. My original therapist became too expensive, so I had to find a new one. And they're like, okay, so what are your goals? And I'm like, well, where do you want to start? They're like, tell me about like what's going wrong in your life. I'm like, how much time do you have? Like, why are you here? Well, when I was born, my mom hated me, so there's that.
Like, just layers and layers and layers. Like, what layer do you want to deal with first? Like,
I know, they're like, okay, so what do you want to focus on right now? I'm like, well, we'll start with the baby's dying part.
Can we do all of it, like in a smidgen of time? So I'm just over it. Like,
can I just do this really fast? No. It's been 6 years, still there.
Yeah, it's a, you know, I think that's another thing, like people just need to realize it's a life process. Like this is our life, this is gonna be us now. We have to deal with it every day, and we're just gonna have to do that. You know, it's not like we can fix it. We're not gonna like, I'm back to who I was. Like, no, where we are changed and we're different, and we're going to have to just deal with loss and that space forever because we've been through it, and that's okay. And we just have to accept that, yeah, that is the way it is. And fixing, you're not broken.
No.
You're not broken. You're human, and you've been through a hard human experience.
And you need to learn how to deal with the fact that you've been through that hard human experience.
Even like childhood, like it took me ages to be like, I'm not broken. It's just I went through something hard,
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't deplete your value as a human being, which for a long time I did not feel valuable as a human being. And sometimes I still don't. And I just have to remind myself, I'm valuable because of who I am, not because of anything else, anything I can offer, or because my mom put like huge emphasis on what can you do for me, like to make yourself valuable to me. And like she would rotate through who like was her favorite kid, and like she would like openly tell you like who her favorite kid would, which was terrible.
Wow.
Like, and it's just like whoever was like basically catering to her the most at the time. Like I don't have to have value because I'm adding value to somebody else, whatever their perception of value is. Like, I am valuable because I'm here. I'm put on this earth. God put me on this earth. God sees me as valuable. So that is why I'm valuable, not because you find some kind of worth in me. And that is something I have to remind myself of a lot, because my mom just tore that down, like from the time I was a baby. Like, the reason she didn't like me when I was a baby, my sister said, she's 6 years older than me, so she remembers more, and she said, she thinks I was just a high needs baby. Like, I needed to be held. I needed to be given more attention to than my siblings. Like, and my mom didn't want to do that. And so I would cry. And my mom was just annoyed with me crying. And she the direct quote is like, you would wake up at 5 a.m. screaming your head off and not stop until you went to sleep at midnight. I'm like, how is that possible? Like,
yeah,
I know babies, like, they sleep at some point. Like, were you just really neglecting me? Like, what was
how bad how bad a mother were you? Like,
now that I have kids, like, I have high needs kids. Like, my sister has said that my daughter is almost exactly like me.
Yeah.
And that's also been like a fun little learning curve of like, no, I wasn't terrible. It's just my mom didn't like me. Like, because my daughter is amazing. Like, she's an incredible little girl. And I'm like, how can my mom hate this? Like, but like, I just really don't understand. Because, like, I mean, I love my son, but my daughter is also like my whole world. I think because she's a girl. Like, it's just different from my son, you know? Like, not to put down my son or anything. Like, I love him. He's
obviously we love all our kids. Like, we love them so much. Like, but there's things that we like more about one and things that we like more about the other. Like, because they're all different. They all have different character traits, and they all have different, like, I love my son and how he's so like considerate, and like he has a lot of self-control, which is really weird. So that I really love, but I love how inquisitive and how creative and how like expressionate my daughter is, like, and she'll like sing and all those things. So it's like those different aspects of their character that we'll like a lot, and then maybe some other characteristics we might be like, we need to sort that out, because if we don't, it's going to be a problem.
I think the biggest issue between me and my son is we have different sensory needs.
Yeah.
And so like I really like quiet and calm, and he's like loud, go all the time. Yeah. And so we just kind of get on each other's nerves. Because I'm like, buddy, we need to quiet down, but I want to be loud. Like,
yeah.
I'm sorry. And versus like my daughter is the most like me. Like, she's okay with just like sitting around and reading a book, like she's much more amenable to that. So, but I just like, the more I learn about her, and just like my sister says, oh my gosh, she's you, she looks like you, she acts like you. And I'm just like, how did my mom hate this? Like, My daughter,
It wasn't about you. It wasn't about
Yeah.
you. It was about her. It was about her not being okay. And that's whatever her trauma is. But yeah,
Yeah.
we have to remember that's not us. Because like I felt that way about my dad. I was like, oh, why doesn't, like at the age of 5, I said to my mom, why doesn't daddy love me?
Mhm.
And he just didn't like me. Like he treated me really badly compared to my sisters. Like I was the go-to pick on, and I still don't know why.
Yeah.
But to be honest, like, who cares? Like,
Yeah.
whatever their why was is whatever their why was. Like, it doesn't have to be logical. It doesn't have to make any sense. And it really doesn't, because kids are innocent. They haven't done anything wrong. They haven't done anything. And I think if we just think on like God and like back to faith, I mean, he died on the cross for us. Like, he suffered for us. We're important to him, So that really gives us all the validation we need in terms of our importance and what, like, the importance of us being here, because we're here for a reason. I mean, we could, like, there's plenty of opportunities where I could not be here. Like, so the fact that I'm here means that he wants me here, because I'm sure there's been a miracle along the way to have me still here. Especially after speaking to so many women where I'm like, wow, you actually like shouldn't even be alive. Like what you've been through, like one lady had 3 ectopics in a row because she had triplets. She had triplets. She was pregnant with triplets, and she literally, like, each of them exploded in her, like, within a few days of each other. And she was in front of me talking to me, and I was like, you're a miracle. Oh my gosh. Like, I'm like talking to a miracle. And she was like, yeah. And I heard God's voice, and like I saw the light, and and she's like telling me all these things that she's seen, and I was like, whoa, like mind blown. Like she was like, yeah, God said that he's always there like with me, but he's not ready for me yet. And I was like, that's so wonderful. But yeah, like there's probably been miracle moments in our lives that we didn't even really notice, like didn't even really note that we could have died, or that something could have completely changed the trajectory of our lives. And he's doing his work. Like he's in the works all the time, like in our lives. And if we look for him, we'll find him. And it's really crazy to think that, and we're here for like he's keeping us here, because in this world, like anything could have happened by now for us to not be
anything here at any time. Like, trying to think about that too much.
Yeah, but the fact that you're here means he wants you here. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because he's like protecting you, and that's how I've been seeing it. Because otherwise, like, yeah, I go a bit stir crazy. I said that to one of my speakers. I was like, God clearly wants you here. Like, you don't have a choice. Because she said she felt bad that she was still alive and that her babies weren't. And, I was just like, seriously, like, you don't have a choice. Like, you're here because God wants you here, because otherwise you wouldn't be here, because it doesn't make any sense that you are here. Like, the doctors can't make any sense of why she's here. They're like, you should not be here, So I was like, you don't have a choice. It's not an exchange. We're here because we're supposed to be here. End of. And our children aren't here because they're not supposed to be here. They're not here because of the sad sin of the world and how crappy it is. And that's the way I choose to see it, because if I saw it as anything else, I think I would not handle that. But I think that makes sense, because God's good. So if he's all good, then he wouldn't take that, he wouldn't just like, that's in my mind anyway.
Yeah. That's kind of what she explains out, and why when God doesn't fix it. Like, she explains it out so well, so much better than I ever could. I felt like, because she's like, oh, God could have healed my husband at any time, like, but he didn't. And there's just so much that's so good in that book.
I'll link that one below as well, and if you could send me the link, that would be great, because that'd be awesome. But yeah, no, it sounds like a good book. Like I think you need
It's
books like that to
yeah.
just perspective shift, you know.
It's an amazing book. I got it. I don't know if you've ever heard of Hope Mommies because it's just a US thing.
Oh.
Um, so it was started by a mom whose baby Gwendolyn Hope died. And it's a ministry to women who've lost babies to stillbirth, miscarriage, and infant loss, I think up to 2 years old. And so they have chapters around the country. There's a chapter here. And I went to their Mother's Day luncheon last year, and they gave the book like as a gift to all the moms. And originally I was just saying, oh, look, another book to stick on my shelf that I'm never going to read. And then I just like kept like looking at it and kept looking at it. I'm like, okay, I'll try like just a chapter. And then I just could not put it down. Like it was just so good. And yeah, like I said, it's like the first book I finished in like 6 years. The last time I finished a book was when we were doing amnio infusions, and I would read in the waiting room, waiting to go back for our appointments. Like that's the last time I finished a book. I've started a lot of books. I've never finished them, but because I have children. But that's like the one book I have finished. Because it was just like one of those things I could not get enough of it. It was just so good, so life-giving, so just perspective shifting. And like Hope Mommies itself is amazing. They're so supportive, they're so loving, they're so sweet. They actually hold a retreat every year. And it's this weekend. I'm going this weekend. And like one of the first like shifts in my grief was when I went to my first one. Like I was at such a horrible, horrible place. And like I just remember that first weekend just being like so transformative. And they were the ones that gave me the Ellie Holcomb CD and led me to naming my daughter Ellie. So like it's just been like I would not be where I am without the support of them. Like they send notes every year on your baby's anniversaries, and like yeah, they're so thoughtful in like everything they put into it. And the retreats are amazing.
Yeah, it sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's like a whole weekend where you get to be with other moms who won't look at you crazy for talking about your baby that died, and like because everyone there has been through it in some respect or another. And that's usually where they're like, so tell us your story. And I'm like, mine takes up all the time. So like at the last retreat I went to, I actually shared mine at dinner before, like, because they break you up into small groups. And like the first night, everybody shares their story. So I shared mine at dinner because you sit together in your small group for meals. I'm like, I'm just going to share mine now because I don't want to take up all the time during small group later, because the first year I went, I took up almost all the time because it took so long to tell the story. And I'm just like, his story is so complicated. And like,
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, it's like, I usually end up in like, they try to match people up as much as they can with like similar losses. And I've met a few people whose baby, like in my groups, who their babies lived like 24 hours or so. But like I've never really met anybody there whose babies lived as long as mine did. And I always feel guilty about it because you hear all these usually the stories of stillbirth. Like there's a lot of stillbirth stories at the Hope Mommies retreats. And I'm like, mine lived for 6 months. I'm sorry. And I've had to come to like,
Yeah, but that's again like that was like it wasn't all fun and giggles. It was like traumatic. It was a long traumatic process. Like so many women are like, oh, I don't belong in this space, or oh, my loss wasn't bad enough. Like, oh well, I got to see them and I got to, and it's like, no. Don't minimize it. Don't change it. Like loss is loss. Loss sucks. It hurts. It doesn't matter how far along, how long you got to hold the baby, how long you saw the baby for, how it literally doesn't matter. Loss is loss. And I'm really seeing that through everyone I've spoken to, including like women who have had like chemical pregnancies. I hate that term. Absolutely hate it. It's a baby. You lost a baby. And that is validating, like that is very valid. Sorry. It's very, very valid. And you can't take that away. So don't minimize it and don't like feel bad about it, because your loss was very valid. And just because someone's baby died before yours does not mean that what you went through wasn't terrible and horrible and just as painful and just as hard and just, you know what I mean? You know, And what you went through was extremely hard because you had to go, you went through the trauma and thing of actually trying to save your child.
Yeah.
When you
And
had,
there were so many times that they were like, we're pretty sure he's about to die. We're pretty sure he's about to die. We're pretty sure he's about to die. And especially those like first few weeks, they had to take us aside and sit us down and like be like, do you want to continue care? Because no dialysis method is working. Like, we can't keep him on hemodialysis. His blood pressure gets too low. We tried peritoneal dialysis, but his catheter is leaking, so it's not working effectively. And they were like, do you want to keep trying? And we were like, yes, we do. And they're like, okay. And they tried again. And that night, the plan originally was to run dialysis for like 2 hours. And it was like a form of hemodialysis. And they ran it for like 12 or something. And he didn't even blink. He just slept through the whole thing. And like, there's so much in Judah's story where like he should not have been alive. And they had no idea how he was alive. And we're like, we know how he's alive. God is keeping him alive. That is the only way we can explain it. And like, there was just so much that like, they had said like the first night, they told us later, some of the nurses and stuff, they were like, yeah, we remember when he came in, we were like, that baby is going to die. Like, just based on how sick he was. They're like, that baby is going to die. And they said they threw everything in the kitchen sink at him the first night, and we're still pretty sure he was going to die. And we're so surprised the next morning when he was still alive. Like, and I'm just like, it's a combination of like how much of a fighter Judah was, as well as like just God keeping him alive, because like, again, he was the first boy to survive. He was only the third survivor overall in the world, and only passed away because the hospital here screwed up. Like, he otherwise, we were pretty sure, would still be alive if it wasn't for that. I mean, we don't know for sure, but just
it sounds like it could have been a real possibility, especially having had two already successful and that he'd made it so far.
Yeah.
But again, like, you did everything you could. There's nothing you could have done any differently, because you would have done it
the same, because I wouldn't have known any better.
So yeah, you did a great job. You did a great job. So well done. And you know, I hope you don't feel bad about it, and I will be praying for you to have that contentment and to feel okay in that, because yeah, you did everything that you could do, and that you can be very, very sure about, because I can tell, like, you're a fighting mama and you fought for him. So never ever question that.
Yeah.
And if you do, just message me. Like,
okay. I'm sure there will be times where I still, but I've gotten a lot better about not questioning myself, not questioning the choices I made, and based on what I know now. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for talking to me even longer. I know we've been talking for a long time. I feel like we'd be very close friends, and we probably just like have coffee and tea and stuff if we actually live near each other. We'd chin wag forever, and our husbands would be like, so it's like bedtime now. Can we? With that,
my husband, he was working from home. He works from home Monday, Wednesday, Friday. He's probably out there thinking, where in the world is she?
Well, we got chatting, okay, and we talked about stuff that wasn't even related to loss, but like trauma in general. Like, it was a long conversation. But yeah, I think when you start bringing other traumas into it, it's like it becomes big.
Yeah. It piles right on.
Yeah, but it's all related, and we have to realize that, you know, I mean, as women, because men apparently don't think like this. They're only in the moment, in this specific trauma at this specific time, nothing else is related. I'm like, I wish I thought like that. That would be awesome.
I know, that would be great.
But as a woman, it's like layered, and then we're just like, everything's connected somehow. Oh, well, this happened because of this, and this is this, and like just knitting it all together. And
Yep.
my husband's sitting there like, how did you relate that to that? How is that? No. What?
It'll be like sometimes I'll start talking and then my husband will be like looking at me and be like, how did you even get there? I'm like, you don't realize, like in my brain, I was putting things together.
Yeah, yeah.
And this led to this, and this led to this, and this led to this. And that's why I said that.
So how do you not realize this? Like,
No, like how do you not do this?
and then they're just like, great.
Like, okay.
Oh, I'm so glad it's not just me, and but your husband does the same thing to you. But yeah, no, they're great. Hey, voice of reason, and logic and everything, and I think they need us. They need us to be, those.
Yeah, what's up?
What's going on?
Hey, we're almost done.
What?
We're almost done.
We're finishing up. I'm sorry.
Oh, come in. Oliver.
He can stay. He's fine. Hi, buddy. It's the dogs.
So you knew it. You knew he was going to come. Well, thank you so much, and it's been really lovely to talk to you and connect with you. And
I'm so sorry I missed that first one.
no, you're all good. You're all good. And honestly, like I've gotten a lot better at talking, so like to women now. So it's probably a good thing.
Yeah, it was just all of a sudden he was starting school. Of course, now he's 6, so he's not starting school. And so it's like running around. I think I literally got home at 4:00 that day, and then like checked my phone at like 4:30, and I was like, oh no.
Don't worry, it's all good. And I got more work done, so I just stayed up and did some things, and then I had another one, and it's all good. It's all good. But yeah, I think God really is just like, yeah, he's got his hand on this event, I think, because I don't think I'd be awake at the times I'm awake at the moment if it wasn't for God. It's like a miracle.
I can totally get that.
Yeah.
Especially being pregnant.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like someone asked me, how do you have energy? I'm like, I don't know. God.
Yeah.
That was it. I said, I was like, it's all him. All him, not me. It's not me.
Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, gosh, it's always hard to come off conversations when you're like,
I know.
but I don't want to leave you. But but I have to, because I've got
My
another
kids are
one.
probably taking over my husband at this point. He needs to finish work.
He needs saving. Okay. I mean,
Yes.
my husband's about to go through the wars because the kids are about to wake up and he's gonna have fun. Good times. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for talking with me. Bye.
Of course. Bye.
Please note that all speakers, including experts and professionals, express information, views, and opinions that should not be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any medical conditions. If you have a medical issue, please consult a qualified professional. Speakers voice their own views, opinions, and conclusions, and they may not reflect the views, opinions, and conclusions of other speakers. Ella Rose, The Joy of Sunflowers, and its sponsors may not endorse all or any of the views, opinions, or conclusions expressed.